Chapter 1720, Face Slapping, Round 8-3. I saw Sapphiro just then, said Little Phoenix. She's in the northwest, less than 5 kilometers away. Princess Sapphiro, to Feng Wu, that was great news. She had been a little worried just then, fearing that Six wouldn't know who Cat 9 was and would kill him too. With Sapphiro around, however, things would be a lot easier. I'll go to her now. Feng Wu ran in Sapphiro's direction, as fast as a shooting star. She wore a skullcap and clothes made from hand-spun cloth, for that was what she had worn the last time Sapphiro saw her as Cat 9. Right now, Six was bewildered. Given enough time, he would make a full recovery, but to hunt down the prince, he had to get up when he was still in a lot of pain. He had been able to sense the prince at first, but for some reason he suddenly lost track of him. What was going on? Six frowned. He paused, did a scan with his mental power again, and still found nothing. His frown grew bigger. If he couldn't find the prince, what about that girl? Six remembered that a girl was with the prince. The prince didn't know formations, nor did he have any bombs on him. So, that girl had to be behind all this. Why wasn't the prince the one with the bombs? Because if he was, he wouldn't have stayed behind. It almost drove Six crazy to recall what happened. He had brought all his men with him on this mission. There had been 30 assassins, and 10 had died during the battle against the prince's men. However, that sacrifice had been expected and necessary. But with the other 20 men, Six gritted his teeth and wanted to skin the girl alive. Compared with the prince, he hated the girl more. Come out! Six yelled at the top of his lungs. His terrifying voice was ear-splitting and resonated in the valley. It was so loud that it made the ground shake. Feng Wu was moving from one cliff to another, and the sound made her stumble. She almost fell off. Little Feng Wu, steady! Little Phoenix cried out. Feng Wu steadied herself. I know. Little Phoenix said, judging by the sound, Six is about 10 kilometers away, while Sapphiro is only 1 kilometer from us. Keep it up. We have to get to her before she meets up with Six. Otherwise, they'll easily suspect you. Feng Wu nodded and picked up speed. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. She felt the trees falling behind on either side of her. We only have 100 meters left, Little Phoenix reminded her. Feng Wu nodded and slowed down. Soon she saw Sapphiro, who was sitting against a tree. And Sapphiro was in a rather miserable state. Her neck had been cut by Feng Wu earlier, who had used Sapphiro's own blade to do it. And the blade was poisonous. Needless to say, Sapphiro had smeared the antidote on her wound immediately, but to her frustration, the wound was still unbearably itchy. Chapter 1721, Face Slapping, Round 8-4. When Sapphiro saw her reflection in the river, she almost fainted. That was because her neck had swollen up like a steamed bun. And it wasn't just swollen. Her neck was itchy and prickly, as if 10,000 ants were crawling all over her skin. Sapphiro finally realized what happened. Feng Wu had set her up. Feng Wu had poisoned her wound when she wasn't looking. Sapphiro was almost in tears. She wanted to kill Feng Wu and drink her blood. She and Feng Wu were still in the middle of a horse race, and the stakes were very high. She wanted to get to the finish line, but each miserable step she took gave her excruciating pain. Therefore, hours later, while Feng Wu was running from 3 spiritual lords, Sapphiro had covered less than 10 kilometers. Just as Sapphiro, who was fighting back the itchy and prickly sensation, rose to her feet to head for her destination, Feng Wu showed up. More precisely, Feng Wu showed up in the disguise of Cat 9. Your Highness! Cat 9 rushed out of the woods, wearing the skullcap, and he ran up to Sapphiro. Seeing who it was, Sapphiro was so excited that she was almost in tears. She was in trouble and needed help now more than ever. Cat 9, it's you. Sapphiro immediately grabbed Feng Wu's hand. It was a good thing Feng Wu wore makeup on her hands as well, or Sapphiro would have seen through her disguise. Feng Wu feigned an agitated voice as well. Your Highness, what happened to your neck? What's wrong? You don't look well. She was a great actress, great enough to win an award. She had wounded Sapphiro and put poison on the wound herself, but she was able to conjure up a sympathetic look in her eyes. Seeing one of her own in the middle of nowhere, Sapphiro had tears in her eyes. She stopped, sat Cat 9 down next to her, and told him what had happened. In the end, Sapphiro said angrily, "That abominable Feng Wu. When I catch her, I'll cut her to pieces." Cat 9 clenched his fist and said indignantly, "Princess, don't worry. If I catch her one day, I'll kill her for you and offer her head to you on a platter." Sapphiro said, "Cat 9, you're the best." Feng Wu said, "Your Highness, I'm your most loyal servant." Sapphiro said, "That you are. I'll give you a generous reward when we get back." Feng Wu thanked her in an excited voice. Sapphiro mumbled, "When did she poison me? I had my eye on her the whole time. When did she get the chance?" She couldn't figure it out. Feng Wu rolled her eyes inwardly. "Sapphiro, are you sure you kept your eyes on me the whole time?" Feng Wu laughed inwardly. She had at least 6 ways to poison Sapphiro. No one could use poison as proficiently as Feng Wu, since she had learned from her beautiful master, who once ruled the continent. Sapphiro would never be her match. Chapter 1722, Face Slapping, Round 8, 5. She knew all of Sapphiro's tricks. Sapphiro didn't expect an answer from Cat 9, and she murmured, "What poison did she use? How do I neutralize it? Why didn't she just kill me with a potent one? Why did she use this one?" Feng Wu laughed inwardly when she saw how distressed Sapphiro was. The poison she gave Sapphiro wasn't all that potent. It came from the tail of a red snake scorpion, but she had refined it with her special technique, making it colorless and odorless, so Sapphiro couldn't detect it. As for why this poison? Because Feng Wu wasn't going to let Sapphiro die just yet. If Sapphiro died, she could only do so after the race was over. It was the scorpion's venom that was causing that itchy and prickly feeling to ensure that Sapphiro wouldn't be able to reach the finish line before Feng Wu did. She still wanted to take all of Sapphiro's wealth, so of course she wouldn't let her win. Meanwhile, Sapphiro grabbed Feng Wu's hands in excitement and cried out, "Cat 9! Cat 9! Feng Wu looked at Sapphiro in bewilderment. Sapphiro looked excited when she said, "Cat 9, carry me." Feng Wu feigned a surprised voice. "What?" Sapphiro couldn't hide her excitement. "Cat 9, carry me down the hill. I'll reward you generously after I defeat Feng Wu." Feng Wu gave Sapphiro a strange look. Even if she were to do that, she would still throw Sapphiro to the ground a few meters before the finish line. The thought of that scene almost made her feel sorry for Sapphiro. Sapphiro had no idea that the person she was placing all her hopes on was Feng Wu herself. Grabbing Cat, she yelled, "Quickly! Carry me!" But Feng Wu looked at Sapphiro and feigned a troubled look. "Your Highness, I came here to find some herbs." Luckily, Feng Wu had all the equipment with her. She had taken all the treasures when she raided Cat 9's secret stash. And one of the shelves contained equipment for picking herbs. So Feng Wu took it. Sapphiro grabbed the basket on Feng Wu's back and threw it away, the herbs in it scattering everywhere. To make it real, Feng Wu had prepared everything. However, at that moment they heard hasty footsteps. Sapphiro and Feng Wu turned to look. A black figure ran toward them. Frightened, Sapphiro almost screamed. She then shoved Feng Wu in front of her as a shield. Feng Wu frowned and smirked. "Good job, Sapphiro. Despite what you say, you still love yourself the most," thought Feng Wu. "Who are you? What do you want?" Sapphiro could sense the killing intent which the black man was radiating. "I'm Sapphiro, the princess of the Senile Grassland. What do you want? I can give you anything. Just stay away from me." Sapphiro's voice trembled. That man was none other than Six himself. Six used to be a handsome man, but... Chapter 1723, Face Slapping, Round 8, 6. Feng Wu had set him up twice, and he had been at the center of both explosions. As a result, he was burnt everywhere. It was so bad that his skin was all black. Your Highness, 6 greeted her calmly. And the princess found the voice familiar. Who are you? Sapphiro frowned and gave 6 a suspicious look. 6 frowned and told her who he was. 6. Sapphiro stared at 6 in disbelief. What happened to you? How did you become like this? 6 said, Your Highness, you don't look so good yourself either. Sapphiro stared at 6 and said, You're right. 6, if you run into someone called Feng Wu in the mountains, kill her for me. I'll give you a reward for it. 6 didn't look very happy. He worked for the older prince and he didn't have to help the princess. Feng Wu stood there quietly and tried to be as invisible as possible. Although she had Cat 9's face now, a spiritual lord was very sharp, and she would be in a lot of trouble if he noticed her. By the way, 6, have you seen 7? Sapphiro asked curiously. 6 shook his head. 7 has other missions. But 7's mission was to hunt down Feng Wu, said Sapphiro matter-of-factly. 6 had no interest in Feng Wu whatsoever. He cupped his fists at Sapphiro and turned to leave. Feng Wu was elated. If 6 left, she would be safe. Feng Wu was already a level 7 spiritual elder now, and Sapphiro wasn't her match now. So, once 6 left, she could do whatever she wanted to Sapphiro. But maybe Sapphiro had sensed something and she stopped 6. Hey, wait. 6 frowned and looked at Sapphiro. Sapphiro studied him curiously. Who did this to you? You've made me curious. 6 didn't answer. Sapphiro said, I see that you're looking for someone. Why don't you tell me who it is? Maybe I've seen them. 6 asked, Your Highness, have you been sitting here for a long time? Sapphiro nodded. I've been sitting here for almost an hour. 6 asked solemnly, Your Highness, have you seen a teenage girl wearing a red dress? She's about 13 or 14, and she's prettier than you. Sapphiro didn't think much of his question at first, but she almost exploded when she heard the second part. Frustrated, she grabbed some herbs and threw them at 6. What did you just say? 6 didn't give an answer. Sapphiro bellowed, Who did you say is prettier than me? 6 was a straightforward assassin, so he said, That girl is indeed better looking than you are. Although she's the reason I'm like this, I can't lie to you. Sapphiro was speechless. Sapphiro almost choked at the assassin's honest and frank answer, and she nearly passed out. 6 said, Your Highness, if you didn't see her, just forget my question. He then cupped his fists again and turned to leave. He still had to hunt down the prince and the teenage girl, and he didn't have time to waste on Sapphiro here. Chapter 1724, Face Slapping, Round 8, 7. Wait. Sapphiro glared at 6. Why do you think I don't know who she is? I do. 6 turned around, narrowed his eyes, and looked at Sapphiro. She's wearing a red dress and she's better looking than me. There's only one candidate. Sapphiro stared at 6 and was infuriated. It's Feng Wu. Feng Wu cringed a little. She wondered if these two people would lose their minds if they knew that the person they were looking for was right next to them. She decided that she would be more careful. If they discovered her, she would be in a lot of trouble. Feng Wu fell back a little to attract even less attention. She wanted to be as transparent as air. Feng Wu? 6 frowned. Sapphiro snorted. Yes, that's her. 6 said, Didn't you say that Feng Wu is 7's target? Sapphiro said, That's right. My brother sent 7 to kill Feng Wu. 6 asked, What is Feng Wu's level? Sapphiro said, She's about my level, a level 3 spiritual elder. 6 looked at Sapphiro as if she was an idiot. Then it's not her. Sapphiro asked, Why? 6 said, A level 3 spiritual elder is like an ant, and 7 would crush her in no time. He would never let her live that long. Sapphiro wanted to nod, but when she recalled how Feng Wu had fought 7, she suddenly didn't know what to say. It was true. Feng Wu couldn't withstand a single strike from 7, but she was as slippery as a fish and as nimble as a cat. It wasn't that easy to kill her. Sapphiro murmured, "It really isn't her?" 6 said, "It can't possibly be her." Sapphiro asked, "That girl with the red dress who hurt you, what's her level?" That question immediately silenced 6. He looked stunned and didn't know what to say. 6? 6? Sapphiro looked at 6 in bewilderment. 6 simply stared at Sapphiro. His head had gone blank. What was that girl's level? He couldn't be 100% sure, but she was definitely a spiritual elder. 6 felt as if he had just been slapped in the face. Sensing this, Sapphiro asked timidly, "Could she be a spiritual elder?" 6 stared at Sapphiro. "How is that possible? She injured me. She has to be a spiritual lord." Sapphiro heaved a sigh of relief. "Good. That's good. If she's a spiritual lord, she can't be Feng Wu." But the look 6 gave Sapphiro was very strange. So, 7 should have killed Feng Wu by now, right? Sapphiro sat on the ground, holding her knees and looking at 6 askance. She wanted an affirmative answer from 6. After all, he had sounded so certain. But this time, 6 hesitated. Feng Wu is only a level 3 spiritual elder, so she can't possibly have escaped 7, right? Sapphiro asked again. She has to be dead now, right? Next to her, Feng Wu was speechless. Chapter 1725, Face Slapping, Round 8, 8. She was alive and breathing and sitting next to them. She was nowhere close to being dead. Seeing that Sapphiro and 6 were paying no attention to her, Feng Wu caught a pheasant from the woods, cleaned it, and wrapped it inside a lotus leaf. She then wrapped it in a thin layer of mud before roasting it. Night was setting in, and Feng Wu hadn't eaten for an entire day. It was cold in the mountains at night, and she desperately needed some food in her system. While she was roasting the pheasant, Sapphiro and 6 were discussing how to kill her. It was a surprisingly harmonious scene. As the mixed scents of the lotus and the pheasant slowly rose out of the mud. Suddenly, they heard footsteps approaching. At that moment, Sapphiro was telling 6, "Feng Wu must be dead." "I know it." 7. But she stopped abruptly when she saw the person who was approaching them. That was because it was none other than 7 himself. 7. Regardless of her condition, Sapphiro ran toward him like a butterfly. She couldn't hide her excitement and almost jumped up. 7. 7. You killed Feng Wu, didn't you? Tell me you've killed her." 6 looked expectantly at 7. He didn't want to admit that he had been set up by a weak spiritual elder twice in a row. It would drive him crazy. Meanwhile, 7 was... His clothes were practically all shredded and he was covered in hundreds of wounds, most of which were scratch marks. Every bit of his skin seemed to be bleeding, and he was in a miserable state. 7 didn't know what to say when he saw the expectant look in Sapphiro's and 6's eyes. He hadn't felt like crying since he joined the assassin organization, but this time, he felt so wretched. He really wanted to cry. Feng Wu stole glances at 7 as she cooked the pheasant. She frowned a little. This wasn't right. According to her plan, the demon chimpanzee would kill 7, but 7 had come back alive. Had the demon chimpanzee been killed? That wasn't right either. A magical beast should be more powerful than a human of the same level. There was no way that the demon chimpanzee could defeat 7. What went wrong? Since 7 wasn't dead, what about the demon chimpanzee? If it wasn't dead either, Feng Wu realized that she could be in a lot of trouble. Seeing the teary 7, Sapphiro was so surprised that her eyeballs almost fell out. Seriously? He was a captain. He could bleed or sweat, but he never cried. Yet why did he have that look on his face? 6 knew 7 better, so he asked, "You didn't accomplish your task, did you?" In other words, he hadn't killed Feng Wu. Sapphiro stared at 7 with wide eyes. That wasn't possible. 7 was a spiritual lord. Chapter 1627, Untitled. Feng Wu said, "Really?" Feng Sun said, "But he soon came back out with a basket and headed for the other side of the hill, so I followed him." Feng Wu narrowed her eyes. Feng Sun said, There's a secret karst cave there. If this guy hadn't led me there, I would never have found that place. Feng Wu asked, then? Feng Sun said, after that guy walked into the cave, somehow, he turned around and saw me. Feng Wu looked at Feng Sun in resignation. Feng Sun looked perfectly innocent. I didn't expect him to turn around so suddenly. If I didn't go after him, what if he ran away? Feng Wu said, you idiot. He saw your shadow on the wall. Why wouldn't he turn his head? Feng Sun said, well, you have a point. Then this guy sounded the alarm. Everything happened all at once, and I didn't have time to react. By the time I caught that man with the hat, the other people in the cave had already run off. Feng Wu didn't know what to say. Feng Sun looked troubled. I looked around and saw that there were indeed traces of people living there before, and someone had indeed been held there as a prisoner, but I can't say that it was Chowga. Feng Wu had a strong feeling that she might have lost a lead to find and save Chowga. Without saying another word, Feng Wu quickened her pace. She covered the 10-minute distance in 7 minutes. Where is he? Feng Wu turned around and stared at Feng Sun when she saw the empty cave. Feng Sun looked completely at a loss. I knocked him out before I left and tied him to a pillar in the cave. I thought I had taken all precautions. How could he have possibly escaped? Damn it. It's all my fault. Feng Sun felt very guilty. It was a very important lead in saving Chowga, and Xiao Wu had forced that man to reveal himself at the cost of her own reputation. She had then handed the task to Feng Sun, but I'm such an idiot. Feng Sun slapped himself, his eyes filled with guilt. Feng Wu was also anxious, but she calmed down when she saw how worried Feng Sun was. With what had happened, there was no point blaming him. He wanted to help Chowga, but things simply hadn't gone their way. Feng Sun had always been a little careless, and Feng Wu hoped that this incident would help him overcome that shortcoming. Feng Wu ignored Feng Sun, who was still blaming himself. There was an intelligent look in her narrowed eyes. She had always believed that one could learn a lot from behavioral analysis. When she looked at the marks around the pillar, she smiled a little. He wasn't going anywhere. Thump. Feng Wu kicked the wall of the cave. Xiao Wu, the cave might collapse if you do that. However, before Feng Sun could finish, he heard a loud thump, and the ground trembled. He yanked Feng Wu back and shielded her with his own body. When the dust settled, they saw a man huddled in a rectangular hollow. It was none other than it's you. Feng Sun almost exploded when he saw who it was. That was the guy he had tied up before. He thought that the man had escaped. As it turned out, he had been hiding beneath them. You bastard! You tried to trick me? Feng Sun felt like he had just been swindled. Chapter 1727, Face Slapping, Round 9, 2. All my injuries were from that demon chimpanzee. Luckily, I was able to straighten things out in the end. Otherwise, that beast would have killed me. Sapphiro said angrily, Feng Wu is heartless. How can anyone be so cold-blooded? She only brings us disaster. 7 completely agreed with her. 6 glanced at 7 and asked, did the demon chimpanzee let you go? Just like that? 7 cleared his throat. Sapphiro asked, what happened? Is that demon chimpanzee so tough? 6 said, the beast is unchallenged in this area and no one dares to mess with it. If they do, they have to pay for it. So, he turned to look at 7. 7 flushed. My black ironstone is gone. So is my illusion sea dragon grass and poisonous spider bones. 6 asked, what about your dragon stream sword? 7 said, that's gone as well. That was to say, 7 had given the demon chimpanzee everything to bail himself out. Feng Wu almost laughed. No, she couldn't do that. She had to keep a straight face. Feng Wu quickly hid her smile, put her serious face back on, and went back to cooking her pheasant. She had been trying to stay unnoticed, but with 2 spiritual lords here, she couldn't stay ignored for very long. Who is he? 7 then noticed Feng Wu. He couldn't be sure, but he thought he saw the teenager smiling. He's with me, said Sapphiro. 7 frowned. Your Highness, if he's someone you met randomly in the mountains, he wondered if this teenager was Feng Wu in disguise, because his physical build looked a lot like hers. At that thought, 7 walked up to Feng Wu, put a hand on her shoulder, and asked the question. You're not Feng Wu, are you? Feng Wu shuddered inwardly. Seriously? Had 7 gained some blind luck? Because he was right. Feng Wu's stomach lurched. What should she do now? Should she fight or deny it? Before Feng Wu could respond, Sapphiro chuckled. Hey 7 you. Sapphiro laughed so hard that she was almost in tears. She pointed at 7 and said, I now see what they mean by once bitten, twice shy. 7, you used to be such a confident man, but you're so jumpy now. What she said helped Feng Wu. 7's face turned livid. He then turned around and stared at Sapphiro. Sapphiro patted 7 on the shoulder. He's Cat 9, and my senior brother thinks very highly of him. He's a boy, a teenager. How can he be Feng Wu? You shouldn't make that mistake even if you're blind. Don't insult him like that. 7 frowned. Feng Wu gave Sapphiro a big thumbs up in her mind. That was great news. Who could have known? Sapphiro had just done her a great favor. Please go on, look at that face and that body. He's a boy through and through. How can he be Feng Wu? 7, were you struck dumb by that beast? How can you mistake him for her? Sapphiro looked at 7 in disbelief. 7 was speechless. Chapter 1728, Face Slapping, Round 9, 3. 7 snorted. I must kill this Feng Wu before sunset tomorrow. 6 looked at him and asked, what if you can't? 7 took a deep breath. The demon chimpanzee said that it wanted to catch Feng Wu, chop her into little pieces and feed her to its baby. The beast will come after me if I can't catch her by then. 6, you have to help me. 6 frowned because he had some difficult missions on hand as well. Seeing 6 frown, 7 said, if you don't have time, just spare me some of your men. I don't need all of them. 5 will be enough. They only need to help me block some roads and tell me Feng Wu's whereabouts. However, 6's face turned livid when he heard what 7 said. His face then went scarlet red. Feng Wu knew that 6 was going to explode. 6. 7 frowned at 6. Will you not even lend me 5 people? 6 didn't say a thing. Sapphiro was confused as well. That was right. 6 had 30 men, didn't he? But none of them seemed to have shown up so far. 6 still didn't say a word. 7 asked, if you can't spare 5 men, how about 3? 6 said, I can't give you even 1 man, let alone 3. 7 said, 6, we're from the same training camp. Why can't you even? They're all dead. 7 said, what? 6 looked up and stared at 7. They're all dead. Happy now. Feng Wu cringed a little. Roasting that pheasant became the most dangerous job in the world since she was right in the center of the storm. She couldn't wait to run away now. 7 and Sapphiro were both stunned. 7 was still trying to digest the news as Sapphiro stared at 6 in disbelief. What did you say? Did you say that all of your men are dead? Every single one of them? 6 snorted with a livid face and didn't say a word. 7 said, how? How is that possible? Who could do that? All 30 of them? Even a spiritual lord wouldn't be able to do that, right? What on earth happened? 6 said, well, it wasn't a spiritual lord. I know that the person isn't a spiritual lord. I'm just saying that even a spiritual lord couldn't do it. I meant, it was a spiritual elder, 6 suddenly said. Those words shocked the other 2 people again. What? Sapphiro and 7 looked at each other, and both were astonished. Sapphiro said, a spiritual elder? Just like me? 6 nodded. Sapphiro was speechless. She could only fight a couple of secret guards at a time, but that person, who was also a spiritual elder, could actually. How could any spiritual elder be so capable? Don't tell me that you ran into Feng Wu. Sapphiro and 7 cried out in unison. Chapter 1729, Face Slapping, Round 9-4. 6 frowned. I don't think so. That girl is only 13 or 14. She was wearing a red dress, is very fast, and knows formations. That's her. That's Feng Wu. Sapphiro and 7 spoke in unison again. 6 looked at them in amazement. 7 said, Feng Wu is wearing a red dress today. She can run very fast, she knows formations, and she's about 13 or 14. Sapphiro nodded as 7 spoke. 6 still didn't say a word. 7 heaved a long sigh. Somehow, seeing 6 in such a miserable state, 7 felt less frustrated. As it turned out, he wasn't the only one who had been tricked by Feng Wu. Someone else was even more miserable. Although he wasn't doing well himself, the fact that someone else was worse off actually made him feel that he wasn't doing too badly. 6, on the other hand, didn't feel as good as 7. So, it was her. 6 clenched his fists. She's the one who saved the prince. Sapphiro and 7 looked at 6 in disbelief. What did you say? With everything that had happened, 6 didn't feel the need to keep things from them anymore. After all, they were all on the same team. My master is making a move on the younger prince again, 6 said indifferently. We should have killed the younger prince by now, but Feng Wu stepped in and saved him. Feng Wu chewed the meat and thought to herself, judging by their calm responses, this isn't the first time that the older prince has tried to take his younger brother out. But? Sapphiro stared at 6 in bewilderment, and after some hesitation she said, So, Feng Wu, a spiritual elder, killed your 30 men while she was being hunted down by 7. She also saved the younger prince and injured you? 6 didn't say a thing. 7 was speechless. The 2 men traded frustrated and angry looks. What we know for certain is that Feng Wu is still in the mountains. 6 smirked. She's not going to get off this mountain so easily. 5 is guarding the gate at the foot of the mountain. So, the gate was indeed guarded. Feng Wu smirked inwardly and felt lucky that she hadn't tried to get down the mountain right away. However, 7, 6, and 5. The older prince wasn't very original with naming his men, was he? Although the names were rather lame, Feng Wu had to admit that they were pretty capable men. Tomorrow we will, Sapphiro beckoned the 2 men to her side and told them her plan. Feng Wu began to frown as she listened. As it turned out, Sapphiro wasn't a complete fool. Her plan to corner the younger prince might be inefficient, but it would work. If that plan was really carried out, the younger prince would have no chance of surviving. He wouldn't be able to escape at all. What should she do? Feng Wu racked her brain. Come to think of it, she was in a rather hilarious situation now. While her enemies were trying all they could to kill her, they had just let her hear every bit of their plan. Feng Wu's eyes lit up as she looked at the dancing flames. She then smiled in satisfaction. A few minutes later, Sapphiro asked Feng Wu, What's that smell? It's so yummy. Feng Wu lowered her head to hide her smile. She then adjusted her hat. Chapter 1730, Face Slapping, Round 9-5. She handed the entire pheasant, which was still wrapped in mud, to Sapphiro. The pheasant is ready. I'm sorry, but this is all I can find here in the mountains. It had been an exhausting day for Sapphiro, and she couldn't keep her eyes off that aromatic fowl. Of course she wouldn't say no. Thump. Feng Wu crushed the hard mud shell. The aroma immediately filled their nostrils. Starving, Sapphiro stuffed a piece into her mouth. Wow, this is so good. It was so delicious that she thought she was going to bite her tongue off. Sapphiro hummed happily and was almost in tears. She even forgot about the prickly sensation on her neck. Feng Wu then handed 6 and 7 a roasted pheasant each. After that, she picked one up herself, sat down by the tree, crushed the mud shell, and started wolfing the meat down. 7 and 6 were very wary after the way Feng Wu had tricked them. They were indeed famished. But safety was their top priority. Only after seeing that Sapphiro and Cat 9 were all right did they start eating. Wow! It really was scrumptious. After the first bite, The two men couldn't stop. They kept putting more into their mouths. Feng Wu lowered her gaze and smiled. Night set in and a heavy fog rose up. The silver moon was completely covered by thick clouds. Suddenly, Seven clutched his stomach and his eyes widened. He pointed from Feng Wu to Sapphiro. "It's poisoned." Seven's face turned livid, and he went stiff. A chill ran down his spine. Six realized it as well. Seven jumped to his feet and pointed at Feng Wu. "You did this." He then charged at Feng Wu like a streak of lightning. Meanwhile, Sapphiro was still stuffing meat into her mouth. She was baffled when she saw the two men's reactions. What happened? What poison? However, at that moment Feng Wu kicked Seven away when he charged at her. He knocked down a few trees as he rolled away. Sapphiro was speechless. She bolted up and stared at Feng Wu in disbelief. "Cat 9, what are you doing?" Meanwhile, Six charged at Feng Wu as well. It put a lot of pressure on her. Six was ranked higher than Seven, which meant that he was slightly more capable than the latter. Moreover, he had just made a breakthrough so that the poison was less effective on him. Thump! Feng Wu and Six exchanged a blow in midair. While Feng Wu stumbled back, Six held his ground. Die! Holding his sword, Six charged at Feng Wu. Sapphiro was dumbfounded. She didn't know how to react to what had just happened. "Cat 9, did you just poison them?" Feng Wu was still Cat 9 in Sapphiro's eyes. That was because since Feng Wu had a chance to set Sapphiro up, why not? At that thought, Feng Wu said loudly, "Your Highness, these two men are up to no good. They have evil plans for you. They want to defile you. If I didn't poison them, they would get what they want." Chapter 1731, Face Slapping, Round 9, 6. Sapphiro was astonished. Seven didn't know what to say. 6 was rendered speechless. The effect of the poison made 7 and 6 dizzy and their vision turned blurry. Hearing Feng Wu's words, they grew agitated, which sped up their blood flow. 7 spat out a mouthful of blood. Sapphiro still didn't know who to trust, so she shouted anxiously, "It has to be a misunderstanding. Stop fighting, all of you. Stop it." However, no matter how loudly she yelled, the three people went on fighting. "Help us!" Seven yelled at Sapphiro. But Sapphiro hesitated. She didn't know who to help. "This person is Feng Wu. It's her. Come over here and kill her." Seven had fought Feng Wu before, so he was familiar with her stances and the way she dodged. Therefore, he was able to guess who she was. But did Sapphiro believe him? Of course she didn't. "Seven, don't make me laugh." Sapphiro immediately rejected the idea. "Come over here and kill her. She really is Feng Wu." Seven yelled at the top of his lungs. Right now, he and Six had caught both of Feng Wu's arms and pinned her hands behind her back. It was a now or never opportunity. If the two of them weren't severely injured and poisoned, they wouldn't have to turn to other people for help to kill someone like Feng Wu. However, Sapphiro didn't know how rare the chance was. She stumbled back. No. Cat 9 is the most important person to my senior brother. You can't do this to him." "Nicely said." Feng Wu gave Sapphiro a big thumbs up in her head. Suddenly, she lifted her foot and kicked Seven in the head. Seven was already forcing himself to stand up. The impact sent him flying backward and he fell to the ground. What a sorry sight. Seven threw a dirty look at Sapphiro. How stupid was she? Thump. The blade of Six's sword went for Feng Wu's neck, and she only dodged at the last moment. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The sword kept slashing down. Feng Wu was attacked from all directions and she kept falling back. There was then a tearing sound. The blade glinted, cutting off a lock of hair on the side of Feng Wu's face. If she hadn't dodged in time, the sword would have left a bloody cut on her. Finally, Feng Wu was forced to take out her sword. There was only one fallen star sword. Thus, Sapphiro opened her eyes wide when she saw the sword. She stared at Cat 9 in disbelief and murmured, "Why does he have that sword? Isn't that Feng Wu's sword? She's Feng Wu. Cough. 7 was so angry that he spat out a mouthful of blood. Thump, thump, thump. 6 charged at Feng Wu. Although he was severely injured and poisoned, he was still a spiritual lord. He was still a very capable man. Just then Feng Wu made her move. Fatal Thunder. It was the third stance of Fallen Star swordplay, Fatal Thunder. Pressing a hand to his chest, 7 struggled to sit up. He then stared at Sapphiro. Can't you see? She used Fatal Thunder. That's Feng Wu's Fallen Star swordplay, Fatal Thunder. Chapter 1732, Face Slapping, Round 9, 7. Right now, Sapphiro was completely dumbfounded. It couldn't be. This couldn't be happening. And oh, it wasn't like that. He was Cat 9. He was a boy. How could he be Feng Wu, that cunning girl? That wasn't possible. You missed the best chance. If we all die here today, it'll be your fault. 7 bellowed at Sapphiro. Then, fighting back his pain, he jumped at Feng Wu. Thump. He struck at Feng Wu with his sword. Feng Wu dodged. But the fair skin of her neck was cut open. Feng Wu was injured. 7 had spared no effort with that strike. After he failed to defeat her with that strike, he didn't have enough strength left for another attack. There was a loud thump. Feng Wu jumped up and kicked 7 in the back. Thump. 7, a spiritual lord, was sent flying by that kick. 7 glared at Sapphiro as his head hit the ground. You traitor! You've betrayed my master. You will be punished by God. Sapphiro was dumbfounded. How did she become a traitor? Infuriated, 6 charged out, brandishing his sword at Feng Wu. He knew very well that if he couldn't take Feng Wu down quickly enough, they would all die. Feng Wu looked alarmed. 6 was a clever man. His moves were so fast that they gave Feng Wu no time to react. She smirked inwardly. 6 didn't have time to waste, and neither did she. She had to finish this as soon as possible. At that thought, Feng Wu charged at 6. When 6 struck at Feng Wu, she ran into it instead of dodging his strike. Thump. The sword landed on Feng Wu's face. Cat 9. Sapphiro cried out in surprise. That was her senior brother's most important person. If he died, she wouldn't know what to tell that man. What should she do now? While Sapphiro was still trying to figure out what to do, a human skin mask fell off Feng Wu's face. It was slashed into 2 halves and fell to the ground. Once the mask was torn, Feng Wu revealed her real face. Just then, 6 was momentarily astonished. Although 7 had been calling her Feng Wu this whole time, there was no real evidence, and 6 had found the claim dubious. However, when she really showed her face, 6 was baffled when he saw that it really was Feng Wu. But 1 moment was all that was needed for one capable fighter to defeat another. 6 was still feeling baffled when Feng Wu's Fallen Star sword pierced his chest. That shocked everyone. 6, a spiritual lord, had just been stabbed. Infuriated, 6 found some strength out of nowhere and threw a punch at Feng Wu. Thump. The power made Feng Wu hurtle backward. Thump. Her back smashed into a tree. But she didn't stop there. She kept hurtling backward. Thud, thud, thud. She only stopped after she smashed through over a dozen trees. Cough, cough. Feng Wu's back hurt so much that she almost passed out. When Sapphiro saw Feng Wu's face, she was dumbfounded. Chapter 1733, Face Slapping, Round 9, 8. She stared at Feng Wu in disbelief. No, this couldn't be happening, this couldn't be real. No! Sapphiro's shriek went through the roof. I don't believe it. Sapphiro almost fainted. You're not Cat 9. You're not him. You're Feng Wu. How on earth can you be Feng Wu? If the fact that this Cat 9 was an impersonator wasn't shocking enough, when Cat 9 turned into Feng Wu, Sapphiro thought she was going to lose her mind. She then recalled how Feng Wu had tricked her, and only just then, She had asked Feng Wu to carry her down the mountain. After that, she remembered how she and the other two men had set up a plan to take Feng Wu down. When all those memories came back to Sapphiro, she almost exploded. Feng Wu! I'm gonna kill you! Ah! Exasperated, Sapphiro picked up her sword and struck at Feng Wu. She was so angry that brandished her sword without thinking about what she was doing. But Sapphiro had lost her best chance. Thump! Feng Wu raised a leg and kicked her away. Feng Wu! Sapphiro was infuriated. Feng Wu rose to her feet, one hand pressed to her chest. Her face had lost all color. But she was smiling at Sapphiro. Sapphiro said, "Are you really Feng Wu? How come you've made so much progress?" Feng Wu looked at Sapphiro and smiled. "You noticed? You're a level 7 spiritual elder at least." Sapphiro was angry and frustrated. "But you only showed the capability of a level 4 spiritual elder before. That is to say, you hid your true capability from the very start. You cunning scumbag." Feng Wu looked at her and suddenly smiled. "What if I told you that I made 3 breakthroughs today? Will you believe me?" "Like hell I will." Sapphiro thought her head was going to explode. Feng Wu chuckled. "Whatever. There's no point talking about that now, is there?" Sapphiro said, "You." Feng Wu then walked steadily towards Sapphiro with a smile on her face. "What on earth do you want?" Sapphiro gritted her teeth and glared at Feng Wu. Feng Wu smiled. "Can't you guess?" Sapphiro asked, "Do you want to kill me?" Feng Wu nodded. "I do. Are you willing to die?" Sapphiro was speechless. Feng Wu chuckled. "You're still useful for me. How can I possibly get rid of you now?" Sapphiro asked, "What on earth do you want?" Feng Wu smiled. "Don't worry. I just want you to know how it feels to lose." Sapphiro asked, "What do you mean?" Feng Wu said, "You'll soon know the answer." All of a sudden, Feng Wu frowned and realized that something wasn't right. When she turned around, she saw that 6 and 7, who had been lying on the ground, had disappeared. "Ha!" Seeing the look on Feng Wu's face, Sapphiro clapped her hands and laughed. "Ha! Feng Wu, I bet you didn't see this coming. Ha!" Feng Wu frowned and looked around. She then narrowed her eyes. It was very quiet, and she could hear the sound of the gentle wind. Chapter 1734, Face Slapping, Round 10-1. How did those two men escape? Feng Wu frowned and looked alarmed, but she had to admit that spiritual lords were indeed as impressive as they were said to be. After they were severely injured and poisoned, they were still able to get away without making a sound. Sapphiro guffawed. "Feng Wu, you're not invincible after all. At least, you couldn't even defeat them when they were poisoned." Feng Wu threw a dirty look at Sapphiro. And why were they severely injured? Whose fault was it that they were poisoned? That successfully rendered Sapphiro speechless. Feng Wu snorted. "They got away, but you're still here, aren't you? I may not be able to do anything to them, but I can certainly handle you." After that, she grabbed Sapphiro's hair and dragged her away. Poor Sapphiro. She was used to living comfortably and had never been mistreated like this before. It was such a humiliation. Sapphiro yelled angrily, "Feng Wu, do you have a death wish? Let go of me. Let go." Feng Wu wasn't in a good mood now. The fact that 6 and 7 had escaped made her vigilant. In the end, Feng Wu had underestimated how powerful spiritual lords could be. She was worried that the two men might be able to force the poison out of their system soon. It had been a while since she concocted the poison, and she didn't have many ingredients on hand. Therefore, she hadn't put too much poison in the pheasants. She was worried that the two men might be able to recover soon. Therefore, when Feng Wu saw the gloating smile on Sapphiro's face, she slapped her, and Sapphiro passed out. Soon, Feng Wu dragged Sapphiro to the swamp. The younger prince had been hiding there the whole time. Wheeze. Feng Wu made the sound that was the secret signal which she had agreed on with the prince. As expected, when she gave the signal, She heard a slight noise from behind a rock a short distance away. Soon, a person covered in mud showed up in front of Feng Wu. Miss Feng. He was thrilled to see Feng Wu, and he quickly rolled toward her in the mud. Feng Wu had taught him to do that to stop himself from sinking in. Miss Feng, you're finally here. Lying there all by himself in the silent darkness, the prince had almost been frightened to death. Who's this? The younger prince asked in bewilderment when he saw the unconscious person. Feng Wu looked at the prince and smiled. Don't you recognize her? The prince moved closer and was shocked. Isn't it my sister? What's she doing here? She. Feng Wu smirked a little. Take a wild guess. Do you think she knows about the danger you ran into today? The prince went silent. Feng Wu rolled her eyes at the prince. Take your clothes off. The prince was confused. Feng Wu didn't speak and only looked at him. The prince felt embarrassed. But they're so dirty. Feng Wu smiled. That's what we need. All the mud is good for us. We don't have all the time in the world, so stop nagging and change your clothes. The prince nodded obediently. Although he had no idea what Feng Wu was going to do, he still nodded and quickly stripped until he was only wearing his underwear. Feng Wu then took off Sapphiro's clothes and tossed them to the prince. Chapter 1735, Face Slapping, Round 10-2. He stared at Feng Wu in astonishment. This. Feng Wu glanced at him. Do you see what I'm trying to do? The prince nodded solemnly. Your plan is to have me pretend to be my sister, so that I can get off the mountain? Feng Wu nodded and said calmly, the roads are being guarded by capable men, and before long, they'll be doing a grid search of the mountain. When they come back with spiritual pets that have a keen sense of smell, you won't be able to get away even if you hide under the mud. The prince bit his lower lip and nodded. He admitted that Feng Wu was right. His older brother was as determined as he was heartless. He had more capable men than one could think of. The prince said, my brother has many capable men working for him. At least 10 of them are as powerful as 7. Feng Wu said indifferently, so be it. They're not invincible. The prince stared at Feng Wu in astonishment. They were talking about 10 spiritual lords here. The prince still wanted to speak, but Feng Wu waved him off. Get dressed. I don't know when 7 and 6 will neutralize the poison. When they do, they'll take their revenge on me. He was filled with guilt when he looked at Feng Wu, and he became even more determined. Miss Feng, I'm going to marry you, thought the prince. Seeing the look in his eyes, Feng Wu patted him on the shoulder. She put a mask that she had found in Cat9's place on the prince's face and had him put on Sapphiro's clothes. Meanwhile, she dressed the unconscious princess in the prince's clothes before burying her halfway in the mud. Feng Wu took out a dagger and pried Sapphiro's mouth open. Ah! Blood gushed out. The prince stared at Feng Wu in astonishment. What a resolute and ruthless girl. That completely shocked the prince. Feng Wu glanced at him. Do you know why I cut her tongue? The prince asked in bewilderment, why? If she starts yelling when she wakes up, she'll ruin my plan. The prince nodded. Feng Wu suddenly smiled. Of course, that's only one of the reasons. The prince said, huh? Feng Wu's voice sounded like a feather dancing in the darkness. The real reason is, she insulted me. The prince's eyes widened. Feng Wu suddenly smiled. Now, are you afraid of me? Only then did he realize that she was scaring him. He blushed and stared at Feng Wu in frustration. Feng Wu laughed. You can't stay so innocent forever. I can save you once, but I can't be there for you all the time. You need to think about it. It would be up to him if he wanted to be a lamb or a wolf in lamb's skin. The prince clenched his fists. Many of his men had told him that, but he had never listened. But this time he did. After clearing up the area around Sapphiро, Feng Wu led the prince away. The look on the prince's face kept changing and it was hard to tell what he was thinking. Feng Wu didn't disturb him, because she knew that this night could change his fate. Chapter 1736, face slapping, round 10-3. Soon, the two of them arrived at the crossroads. The prince was still marching forward, but Feng Wu stopped him and pulled him into a thick growth of grass. He felt only half awake, and he looked at Feng Wu in bewilderment. The grass was tall enough to cover them completely, so if they didn't walk out of it, they wouldn't be spotted. Feng Wu lowered her voice and whispered in the prince's ear, "There's a secret guard behind that rock to the northeast." The prince was suddenly alarmed. He looked in that direction and soon saw a shadow under the moonlight. He took a deep breath. "There's someone up in the tree to the northwest as well." The younger prince was speechless. "See that branch over there? All the branches around it are swaying in the wind, but it isn't. Why do you think that is?" The prince asked, "Is it because it's fake?" Feng Wu said, "The branch is real, but it's on someone's back. It can't move because it's been tied up too tight, which is what gives it away." The prince used to think that Feng Wu was on the same level as he was. The longer he observed her, however, the more impressed he was. "But that person is the most important one." Feng Wu pointed at a man sitting on top of the tree some distance away. "That's the most capable man of them all. If you can get past him, you'll be able to get away." The prince followed Feng Wu's finger, and he had an amazed look in his eyes. "That's 5, he said. Although his face is covered, he has it 5 embroidered on his chest. He's the 5th captain of my brother's assassins." After all those years being targeted by his older brother, the young prince knew a thing or two. Feng Wu nodded. "That's what I heard from them as well. If 5 is guarding the way, we won't be able to get away." The prince frowned. 5 is all about business, and takes his job very seriously. Feng Wu smiled. "But you're Sapphiro now." Only then did the prince remember that he was playing his sister. Feng Wu said, "Your sister is on your brother's side." The prince said, "But 5 will probably keep me here and only let me go after everything is over. He's always like that. He only takes orders from my brother." "Was that so?" Feng Wu rubbed her nose and her eyes lit up. "We're not out of options yet. We can try something." Once again, she knew what to do. The prince's eyes flickered as he looked at Feng Wu in amazement. Feng Wu said, "Before that, I need to tell you something. It's serious." The prince turned to her with a solemn look on his face. Feng Wu said, "I have a bet with Sapphiro. The stakes are very high. If I win, I get to walk away with all the wealth she has accumulated." "Wow!" The prince cried out in surprise. "My sister is very rich. She has a mine of crude spiritual stones." Feng Wu's eyes lit up. "After you go back, keep an eye on Sapphiro's property for me. Make sure that nothing is taken away." The prince nodded solemnly. Chapter 1737, Face Slapping, Round 10-4. "When the moment comes, that mask on your face will be useful," said Feng Wu. "It's Cat 9's face. Before Sapphiro comes back, you can do a lot of things when you're pretending to be Cat 9. The more the prince heard about it, the more amazed he was by Feng Wu. "So, the only problem now is to get you off the mountain safely." Feng Wu looked at the prince. She then whispered something in his ear. The prince looked surprised. "What are you waiting for?" Feng Wu kicked him in the butt. "Oh right." The prince returned to himself and dashed off. As he ran, he yelled at the top of his lungs. "Help! I'm Sapphiro, the princess. Feng Wu, you can't kill me." Right now, Feng Wu was playing no one but herself. She snorted. "Are you begging me to spare your life? In your dreams?" She then drew out her fallen star sword. Murderous energy filled the air. Thud! The sword almost hit the prince, but he narrowly escaped. Feng Wu smirked. "Your life in my hands now, and you're not going anywhere. You can't run from me forever. Just die." As she spoke, she struck at him again. The men in black behind the rock and on the tree looked at each other. Seeing that their princess was about to be killed, they stepped out. One approached Feng Wu from behind. The other met Feng Wu head-on, moving at a tremendous speed. "We've been searching everywhere for you, and here you are." Feng Wu, We've been waiting for this moment. The older prince's order was to kill both Feng Wu and the younger prince. Those were their two tasks as they remained here to guard the entrance. But the two tasks weren't of the same importance. Killing the younger prince was their top priority. After that came the task of killing Feng Wu. But they could complete the minor mission before getting to the major one. Feng Wu pretended to only be a level 3 spiritual elder when she ran after Sapphiro. And the man underestimated her. How dare a mere level 3 spiritual elder behave so arrogantly in front of us? Chasing our princess? Preposterous. Thump, thump, thump. They started exchanging blows. Immediately, Feng Wu grabbed the man behind her and threw him over her shoulder. The moment she threw him, she launched her killing move. The blade she was hiding between her fingers glinted. Whoosh! It cut the man's throat open. The man didn't expect to actually fight a level 7 instead of a level 3 spiritual elder. You. He collapsed before he could finish the sentence. The other man stared at his fallen companion in disbelief. How was that even possible? According to the information they had gathered, Feng Wu was only a level 3 or 4 spiritual elder. How could she have killed a level 6 spiritual elder? Had this world gone insane? Meanwhile, Feng Wu ignored the other man in black and marched towards Sapphiro. One had to admit that the younger prince had some talent in acting as well. He mimicked Sapphiro to the T. As Feng Wu approached, he fell back. Hey, stay away from me. Don't get any closer. I'm the princess of the grassland. You can't kill me. Feng Wu smirked. Sapphiro, how dare you ambush me? Do you think these two weaklings can stop me? Don't make me laugh. As she spoke, she raised her fallen star sword. Chapter 1738, Face Slapping, Round 10, 5. Sapphiro turned to run. The remaining man in black stared at Feng Wu. How dare you ignore me? He grabbed his sword and charged at her. Whoosh! Fallen star sword made a perfect arc in the air. And it hit its target. At that moment the man looked down and stared at his own chest. He had just been pierced by a sword. Feng Wu smiled proudly. What made you think you can stop me? She then pulled the sword out. Instantly, blood gushed out, splashing all over the ground. Some even got onto the prince's face. Feng Wu did it on purpose. With the blood on his face, even if the prince didn't play his part well, 5 wouldn't be able to pick it out so easily. At the same time, the prince was shocked to see Feng Wu killing the two men so quickly. He turned around and started running, yelling loudly. Don't kill me! Don't kill me! He wondered where 5 was and what he was waiting for. Thump! The prince deliberately fell to the ground. Feng Wu smirked and ran toward him, dragging the tip of the sword over the ground. The tip made a long gash in the ground. Feng Wu smiled maliciously. Were those men the only help you had? So much for the famous Princess Sapphiro. I'm going to send you where you belong. Be clear in your next life. You should never mess with me. The prince fell down and twisted his ankle, but he crawled as fast as he could. He shouted nervously as he moved, Help! Brother, help! Feng Wu raised fallen star sword. Help you? I'd like to see who would do that. The moment the sword struck down, thump. A leaf appeared out of nowhere, aimed at Feng Wu's throat. How impressive! If Feng Wu didn't know that a spiritual lord was hiding there, she might have actually been injured. But she knew and was prepared. The sword that was aiming at the prince's head suddenly changed direction. Clang! There was the terrifying sound of two weapons clashing with each other. Feng Wu raised the sword in front of her forehead. A spiritual lord was indeed very powerful. It was only a small leaf, and Feng Wu had been prepared for it, but she still stumbled backward. She only steadied herself after retreating 7 steps. Who's there? Stop hiding! Come out! Feng Wu looked around and shouted. In fact, she already knew that the person was 5, a spiritual lord. That was an intimidating person, but she had to take the risk for the prince's safety. 5 frowned as well. He jumped off the tree and stood in front of Feng Wu. Like the other captains, he wore black from head to toe, and only his eyes weren't covered. What a pair of eyes! They were as dark as an abyss. Feng Wu stared at Five, and Five stared back at her. Meanwhile, Feng Wu gestured at the prince. She was telling him to run. The prince was worried about Feng Wu's safety. After all, Five was a cold-blooded spiritual lord. Chapter 1739, Face Slapping, Round 10-6. However, it was just like Feng Wu had said before. If he couldn't escape, all the sacrifices she had made would go to waste. Miss Feng, I promise I'll marry you. If you die, I'll marry you at your grave. I'll still recognize you as my official wife, thought the young prince. Despite his reluctance, the prince gave Feng Wu one last look before he bolted. Five saw the princess run off, but because she was Sephiroth, she was permitted to leave the mountain. So he let her be. Moreover, this teenage girl in the red dress had caught his attention. You were able to dodge the dagger leaf. Five curiously looked Feng Wu up and down. He sounded utterly calm and didn't seem agitated at all. Feng Wu was already a dead person to him, so he was in no rush at all. The energy which the spiritual lord gave off almost made it impossible for Feng Wu to breathe. She would never have confronted the man if she had any other choice. Are you the legendary Five? Feng Wu frowned. Five nodded. Feng Wu chuckled. Aren't you supposed to be a spiritual lord? There I was thinking how intimidating you might be. But is that all you can do? Five narrowed his eyes. Young lady, be careful with your choice of words. Feng Wu smiled. I was under the impression that a spiritual lord should be able to kill me with a single strike, but I blocked your attack. I think I have a right to use whatever words I like. Young lady, don't you know that I only use 20% of my strength? Five smirked. Feng Wu glared at him. Five grinned maliciously. He enjoyed seeing the smile disappear from her face and the way she stiffened. Right at that moment, Feng Wu suddenly turned around and ran as fast as she could. Five was speechless. He hadn't expected the girl to give up so easily. The moment she heard about his true capability, she bolted. Five smirked. Have you forgotten how arrogant you were a moment ago? Why are you running away now? Feng Wu wasn't going to answer that question. She had safely sent the prince away, and he would make sure that she didn't lose her bet with Sephiroth. Right now, she was facing her biggest problem. Feng Wu pondered as she ran. What if she hadn't helped the younger prince? She could have worn Cat9's mask or pretended to be Sephiroth. That way, would she be able to fool the others and get down the mountain? Feng Wu smiled wryly. Since she had already gotten involved, she might as well stick to it. She was sure that it was the right choice in the long run. She hoped the prince would reward her generously. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. She ran so fast that she felt like she was flying. The wind howled in her ears. Five was close behind her. All of a sudden, Five stepped onto some fruit peel and boom! It exploded. Luckily, Five dodged in time. Otherwise, he would have been injured. But that was only just the beginning. In the next few minutes, Five had to dodge explosions, secret weapons, wasps, other insects, traps, and so. Do you think you can stop me with these petty tricks? Five smirked. Preposterous. Chapter 1740, Face Slapping, Round 10-7. But because of those petty tricks, Five wasn't able to catch Feng Wu right away. Moreover, the distance between them was getting bigger. Whoosh! Feng Wu jumped into the mud. A moment later, Five arrived as well. He frowned when he saw the black swamp. The mud was giving off a stench. Everywhere he looked, he only saw the undisturbed surface of the swamp. That girl has to be here. As a captain, Five would never jump into the mud himself. Hence, he crossed his hands behind his back and looked at the swamp. With him here, Feng Wu would never be able to run away. He had cornered Feng Wu in this swamp. Just then, all of Five's men arrived. In the assassin organization, Every captain had 30 men under them. Unlike 6, who had brought all his men with him, 5 had only brought 10. "Captain!" The 10 men bowed at him. 5 gave a wave of his hand and said coldly, "Go search the swamp. Drag her out." "Yes." Immediately, all 10 men rushed into the swamp. At that moment, "Who's there?" There was a rustling noise in the cave nearby. Other people might miss it, but it couldn't fool 5's ears. Hence, 5 immediately ran in the direction of the cave. The next second, 5 was inside the cave. "Who's there?" In the darkness, 2 figures sprang out and charged at 5. Thump, thump, thump. They clashed into him. The 2 men then flew backward and spat out blood when they smashed into the wall. But 5 stood there, as steady as a rock. "5!" The 2 men cried out in surprise. 6? 7? Thanks to the dim moonlight which shone into the cave, 5 finally saw who the other 2 men were, which only astonished him. He pointed at the other 2 men. "What happened? What did you 2 do to yourselves?" In the organization, the 10 captains were more or less of the same level. 5 had never seen the other 2 men look so miserable. The question silenced 6 and 7. "What happened?" 5 urged them. 7 knew that he couldn't keep such a thing a secret, so he told 5 how Feng Wu had tricked him. After he finished, he nudged 6 with his elbow and said, "Your turn." Hence, 6 told his story as well. Bullshit. 5 wouldn't believe it. Feng Wu is only a level 7 spiritual elder. You're telling me that she did this to you? I don't buy it. 6 and 7 said in unison, "She's really good. She's cunning and knows a lot of tricks, and they never seem to end. You won't know where she'll hit you." 5 smirked. "Cunning? You won't know where she'll hit you? She's just an arrogant girl and nothing more. The story you came up with is just to shirk your responsibility. Gosh." 6 and 7 were so angry that they almost exploded. Chapter 1741, Face Slapping, Round 10, 8. Of course Feng Wu was cunning. She practically had it written across her forehead. Wait, 7 suddenly realized something and stared at 5. "Have you seen her?" 5 said proudly, "Of course I have. Right now, she's hiding in the swamp, and my men are searching for her." "What?" 7 and 6 looked at each other, and both saw rage in each other's eyes. "That Feng Wu. Let's go." They seemed to have forgotten about their wounds as they rushed out of the cave. They ran as fast as streaks of lightning. 5 frowned. "She's just a petty girl. Why do you think so highly of her? Have you forgotten? You're spiritual lords." 5 yelled after the 2 men. But they were long gone and didn't hear what 5 said. Soon, they all gathered outside the swamp. "Where's Feng Wu? Where is she?" 6 and 7 used to be very calm men, but they were shaken after having been tricked by Feng Wu several times. 5 put his hands behind his back and shook his head. Suddenly, he recalled something 6 said. "Did you catch the prince?" 6 shook his head solemnly. 5 said, "So, I still need to guard the mountain entrance. I'll be in a lot of trouble if I let him run away." Although 20 of his men were there already, 5 was still worried. Just then, someone in the swamp cried out, "I found someone. Someone is hiding here." 5 was leaving, but he stopped abruptly. He then gave 7 and 6 an indescribable look. "Are you dumb? How did you let her escape? See? We got her." "Did we?" thought the other 2. 6 and 7 were filled with expectation and doubt. Was that true? Feng Wu, who had set them up so many times, had been caught by 5 just like that. Can that girl be playing some trick again? 7 murmured to himself. Feng Wu was just so intimidating. Other things aside, she had even pretended to be Cat 9 and hid behind Sapphiro. When she was roasting the meat, she had heard all their plans. Moreover, she had even poisoned the food. Despite all the precautionary measures they took, she was still able to poison the 2 of them without raising the alarm. The girl really was a piece of work. 5 couldn't believe 7. he smirked and said, "The two of you made up such an unbelievable excuse just to shirk responsibility." 6 was speechless. 7 was speechless. 7 said, "I bet you won't catch Feng Wu so easily." "So do I. Feng Wu will never let you catch her so easily," 6 said solemnly. Crossing his hands behind his back, 5 snorted. "I see that I'll have to convince you with some hard evidence." Chapter 1742, Face Slapping, Round 11 1. 5 had been about to go guard the mountain entrance earlier, but he decided to stay now. He stood there and watched his men carry a person toward him. The person was unconscious and covered in blood. They couldn't see the face, water. 5 gave the order in a cold voice. Soon, one of his men brought back a bucket of water and splashed it all over the person. When the cold water washed away the mud, 6 was astonished. "That outfit. Isn't that?" Everyone looked at him in bewilderment. 6 said, "Isn't it the younger prince?" "What?" Everyone was shocked. Talk about a happy coincidence. 6 was so happy that he almost lost his mind. Grabbing the bucket, he poured the water all over the person. Soon they saw the face. It was a familiar face that they all recognized. "Isn't it? Isn't it? Isn't it Princess Sapphiro?" They were all astonished. 6 was utterly disappointed. 7 had seen this coming. 5 was the most shocked of them all. He clenched his fists and blue veins popped on the back of his hands. That was impossible. How could this person show up here? This couldn't be happening. This isn't right. 5 shook his head. She can't be Princess Sapphiro. It can't be her. 6 said loudly, "That's right. Isn't he wearing the prince's clothes? He should be the younger prince. Have you forgotten?" He then told 7, "Feng Wu has human skin masks. She can look like other people." Look like other people? Human skin masks. An idea seemed to strike 5 at that moment. But the idea disappeared too quickly for him to grasp. Just then, Sapphiro woke up. When she woke up to see the familiar faces, she whimpered in excitement. But with her tongue cut, she couldn't utter a word. 6 frowned. This can't be Princess Sapphiro. He has to be the younger prince wearing a human skin mask. He then ran up to Sapphiro and started rubbing her face. Sapphiro was so angry that she grumbled. If she could, she would kick 6 away. Unfortunately, she didn't have any strength left. 6 was disappointed. He moved away and shook his head at the other 2 men. 5 finally came back to himself. He stared at Sapphiro. "Didn't you leave the mountain already?" "Already?" Not only Sapphiro, but all the other people gave 5 strange looks as well. 5 had a bad feeling. He stared at Sapphiro and gritted his teeth. "When Feng Wu hunted you down earlier, you ran all the way to the entrance of the mountain, and I came out to save you. Wasn't that you?" No. That Sapphiro shook her head repeatedly. She was so frustrated she had never gotten as far as the mountain entrance, let alone be chased by Feng Wu. It had to be one of Feng Wu's ploys. Chapter 1743, Face Slapping, Round 11, 2. 5. Princess Sapphiro's skin is wrinkled. She was in the water for at least 2 hours, 7 added. 5 was speechless. Feng Wu has human skin masks, 7 added another sentence. Feng Wu is on the younger prince's side, said 6. If this is the real Princess Sapphiro, and if that was the real Feng Wu, who was the person that ran down the mountain? Who? 5 stared at the others. Everyone fell silent. A name suddenly came to their minds. The younger prince. Everyone looked astonished. Could it really be him? Had he really left the mountain already? Go! They couldn't care less about Feng Wu now. Everyone ran down the slope as fast as they could. Their top priority was to kill the young prince. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. They dashed off without giving Sapphiro another look. Feng Wu was hiding under a slope a short distance away. She had tied some dry grass on her head, which was why no one had been able to find her when she lay there on her stomach. She watched as Five's men searched the swamp. But she wasn't worried, because everything was going to plan. The last of Sapphiro's task was to help Feng Wu and the younger prince stall for time. As expected, she indeed bought them a lot of time. Hearing their conversation, Feng Wu knew that Five had guessed the truth. Only now? The younger prince had probably reached the campsite by now. The prince was no fool. He would definitely go to Chieftain Senil. The chieftain didn't want his older son to be too influential, which was why he had groomed his younger son. Without the strife between the two sons, the chieftain himself would become the older son's target. Therefore, he would never let the younger son die. Seeing them dash off, Feng Wu smiled a little. That way, the others would only pay attention to the younger prince, and she would be safe. At the end of the day, Feng Wu just wasn't the type who would sacrifice herself for a stranger. She had planned this ever since she started helping the younger prince. When she was about to leave the mountain, crashed, she heard a noise. What was that? Confused, Feng Wu looked behind her, but she didn't see anything. So, she resumed walking. A few steps later, she heard a crack. It was that strange noise again. Feng Wu found it very odd. It gave her an uneasy feeling. Somehow, she felt that she had missed something. But what was it? She patted her head. Just then, she heard a whimper somewhere beneath her. Looking down, she saw that it was Sapphiro. Why didn't they take you when they left? Aren't you the most respected Princess Sapphiro? Crouching down, Feng Wu looked at Sapphiro with a half-smile on her face. Sapphiro stared at Feng Wu with eyes filled with hatred. Why was this Feng Wu everywhere? With everything that had happened, Sapphiro would be lying if she said that she wasn't amazed by what Feng Wu had done. Chapter 1744, Face Slapping, Round 11, 3. Feng Wu was going to mock Sapphiro. After all, the princess was like a proud rooster and had been showing off her power in front of Feng Wu. However, before Feng Wu could say anything, she suddenly saw a peak a short distance away there. Flames were leaping toward the sky. That was an eruption. Immediately, Feng Wu felt as if she had been struck by lightning. She finally realized what she had forgotten. The recovery of the spiritual essence. Emperor Wu had brought them here for the recovery, which only happened once every 3 years. It was said that it would only last for 3 days. In those 3 days, if one stayed in the area of the recovery, they would make very rapid progress. But at the same time, the opportunity also came with great danger. Feng Wu then recalled what she had been told. The place of the recovery was also the legendary land of the spirit source. And that land would produce 1 seed of the spirit source. If one obtained that seed, one would make tremendous progress in their capability. At that moment, Feng Wu thought about Zhuo Qinghuan and all the people who had bullied and mistreated her. If she could obtain that seed this time. No. There was no. She had to get it. Just then, the ground shook violently and she almost lost her balance. Something else then suddenly happened. Mountain peaks started rising out of the ground like bamboo shoots. They grew as she watched. Meanwhile, something else was changing drastically as well. Feng Wu watched as the ground started stretching out in all directions. If the ground was like a closed fan before, it had just unfolded. The mountain area was suddenly 10 times what it used to be. That was it. Feng Wu had been wondering why a common mountain like this could become the land of the spirit source. She finally understood now. But she also knew that it was all because of the spirit source formation. When the land of the spirit source disappeared after 3 days, this place would go back to normal. And the event would take place again after 3 years. Sapphiro cried out in terror. Feng Wu followed her gaze and narrowed her eyes. A short distance away, a mountain peak had collapsed, and a landslide was coming their way at a tremendous speed. Itchem. Tears rolled down Sapphiro's cheeks. She didn't want to die. She really didn't. She pleaded with her eyes, but she didn't have a lot of hope. Because if she were in Feng Wu's place, she would never take Feng Wu with her in a critical moment like this. However, to her surprise, before the landslide reached them, Feng Wu picked her up and dashed off as fast as she could. Whoosh! Feng Wu had been injured, but after her 3 breakthroughs, her wounds were almost all healed. The roaring landslide was at their heels and Feng Wu had to run as fast as she could. Just then, a peak suddenly stood in her way. Without thinking, Feng Wu tossed Sapphiro onto it. Ah! Sapphiro screeched. Chapter 1745, Face Slapping, Round 11-4. She had thought that she was going to die for sure, but while she was falling, Feng Wu climbed up from below the cliff, caught her, and tossed her up again. Sapphiro was speechless. What a terrifying experience. Sapphiro had never been through something so frightening before. Feng Wu had grabbed some small rocks off the ground earlier, so she quickly climbed up the cliff. Meanwhile, the cliff also stopped the landslide, but more kept coming, and it was rising as Feng Wu watched. Luckily, Feng Wu was faster. When she reached the top, the landslide had only risen halfway up the cliff. Phew! Feng Wu lay flat on her back and wiped away her cold sweat. Meanwhile, she finally had time to look around. When she looked behind her, she saw that she was above a valley. The cliff was at the bottom of a long, steep slope, which was why the landslide had been right behind them. The landslide finally went around the cliff and went on rushing down the mountain. Standing on top of the cliff, Feng Wu could sense the ground trembling at the momentum, and she knew that the change hadn't finished yet and that the energy was still at work. Because of the emerging land of the spirit source, the terrain went through a tremendous change. Hence, mountain peaks rose up like bamboo shoots, and some of them were only hundreds of meters apart. Just then, Feng Wu cried out softly. She seemed to notice a figure on the mountain peak nearby. The figure lay there motionless, as if passed out. Cracked as the terrain changed, cracks covered the sides of that mountain peak. It had to be that person's most unlucky day. That mountain peak was going to collapse, and once that happened, that person would be carried away by the landslide. A landslide was worse than a flood. Feng Wu could get herself out of a flood, but with a landslide, once one was buried under mud and stones, it would be almost impossible to get out. Just then, the person woke up and slowly got up. Feng Wu let out a breath of relief. It seemed that that person would survive. "Hey, you can come over," he dashed. Before she could finish, the person slowly rose to his feet and turned around. When Feng Wu saw his black outfit and the number on his chest, she was stunned. 7. Feng Wu was dumbfounded. 7 was also baffled by the sight of Feng Wu. Immediately, there was a terrifying look in his eyes. Feng Wu didn't know what to say. She had just run into her enemy. Below, the landslide was still flowing ferociously. A few hundred meters away, 7 was staring at her with a murderous look in his eyes. "Hey, don't get any closer," Feng Wu yelled at 7. But of course 7 wouldn't listen to her. The mountain peak he was on was so cracked and shaky that it could collapse at any moment. Feng Wu saw 7 take a step back. He was going to use a run-up to reach her. Sapphiro was thrilled to see 7 coming her way, and she whimpered in excitement. Chapter 1746, Face Slapping, Round 11-5. Feng Wu couldn't be bothered to deal with Sapphiro. Right now, her top priority was 7. Her mind raced. 7 was a spiritual lord. Although he was severely injured, he was still more than good enough to kill her. Therefore, she couldn't let him reach her. Whoosh! Just then, 7 dashed toward her at top speed. His lean dark figure arched in the air as he aimed for Feng Wu's cliff. The top of the peaks were very narrow. Roughly, they were only 10 meters in radius. 7 had obviously done the calculations, and his aim was very accurate. If everything went as planned, he would land on her cliff. Seeing this, Feng Wu narrowed her eyes. She couldn't afford to let 7 land on her cliff. While 7 wasn't looking, Feng Wu had a handful of beans in her hand. Sapphiro had been watching Feng Wu the entire time, so she noticed this and tried to warn Seven. However, with her tongue gone, she couldn't convey her message efficiently. Seven couldn't understand what she meant until he set foot on the cliff. Because he couldn't stop and kept rushing forward. His face went pale. He only managed to steady himself by spinning around. However, at that moment Feng Wu raised a leg and kicked Seven hard. Seven had used all his strength to stop himself, and Feng Wu's kick was the last straw. Ah! Despite his usual calm, Seven cried out. He fell off the cliff, flailing his arms. Unfortunately, he didn't have wings. Sapphiro was so exasperated that she tried to yell at Seven. She then gave Feng Wu an accusing look. Do you want to call me underhanded? Feng Wu glanced at her and said indifferently, that's just survival of the fittest. It's the way this world works, isn't it? Sapphiro still wanted to protest, but Feng Wu chuckled. Seven wanted me dead, so was I supposed to just stand there and wait for him to kill me? Why am I underhanded just because I struck first? Sapphiro, stop using your double standards on me. That rendered Sapphiro speechless. She couldn't think of a retort. But a spiritual lord was very hard to kill. Feng Wu was almost certain that Seven would be finished off this time, but after he dropped over the edge of the cliff, he was able to turn around in the air after he fell 50 meters. Thump. Seven's fingers pierced the cliff face. The gashes on his hands were so deep that the bone showed, but he still managed to hang on. Feng Wu looked down and saw Seven dangling on the side of the cliff like a piece of dried meat in the wind. Feng Wu didn't know what to say. This spiritual lord was tougher than she had expected. To Feng Wu's surprise, after Seven steadied himself, he started climbing. Beneath him, the landslide was still roaring. Chapter 1747, Face Slapping, Round 11-6. He climbed up, sticking his bloody fingers into the side of the cliff. Thump. The sound of his fingers piercing the stone was quite jarring. It gave one the creeps. Just then crack. The mountain peak a few hundred meters away was finally brought down by the landslide. With a cracking sound, the mountain peak fell apart and was soon devoured by the running torrent. The whole mountain peak disappeared, as if it had never existed. Feng Wu didn't know what to say. Sapphiro was speechless. Both of them looked astonished. Compared with the power of nature, humans were such petty beings. Seven paled a little. If he hadn't jumped over to this side, he wouldn't have survived. Whoosh! Seven picked up speed. But Feng Wu didn't want him to climb to the top. She picked up a long stick and tried to poke Seven's head with it. Seven was speechless. He was a formidable spiritual lord, but because of his severe injuries, he had to endure this. Normally, such a stick wouldn't have posed any threat to him. But now, he had to shift around to avoid the stick. Dun. Feng Wu jabbed him as if she was poking a rat. At first, Seven was almost cornered, but soon his eyes flickered. When the stick came at him again, Seven opened his mouth. He caught it between his teeth. Feng Wu didn't know what to say. She tried to pull the stick back, but she wasn't strong enough. Seven smirked. Taking the opportunity, he moved faster. He was about to reach the top when Sapphiro raised her chin proudly at Feng Wu. She thought, Seven is coming up soon, and there's no way you can stop him. You're dead. Feng Wu gave her a meaningful look. The look gave Sapphiro the creeps, and she wondered what Feng Wu wanted. Feng Wu suddenly smiled, and it gave Sapphiro a bad feeling. If I can't stop him, you will. Feng Wu took action immediately after that. She then kicked Sapphiro. With her tongue cut, Sapphiro couldn't utter a word, but there was a terrified look in her eyes. It was too late for her to do anything. She fell right over the cliff. Feng Wu had either calculated the direction, or it was a happy coincidence. Sapphiro fell down to sit right on Seven's shoulders. The impact almost crushed Seven. He would have been able to climb up if he were on his own, but now, there was Sapphiro. Whoosh! He plummeted. His nails left gouges in the stone. Arg! Hearing the howling wind in her ears, Sapphiro screamed as she fell. The fear made her grip Seven's head and put her hands around his nose and mouth. Chapter 1748, Face Slapping, Round 11, 7. 7 almost suffocated. Meanwhile, Sapphiro was overwhelmed with regret. If she knew that Feng Wu would be so relentless, she would never have messed with her. Feng Wu was like the goddess of death. Feng Wu sat on the edge of the cliff, her legs dangling in the air. Resting her chin in her right hand, Feng Wu watched Seven and Sapphiro struggle with a gloating smile on her face. It was in a moment like this that one could see the nature of a person. Seven would have been able to climb up the cliff if he was on his own, but now, Sapphiro was on top of him. Sapphiro would never be able to get back up on her own, so she would never release Seven. How would the two people choose? Sapphiro's weight pulled Seven down, and he couldn't stop falling. Under normal circumstances, the fall wouldn't kill him. But now, a raging landslide was beneath them, which could crush a human being as easily as the sea devouring a little boat. "Let go," Seven bellowed. "No! I won't." Sapphiro had thought that Feng Wu had cut her tongue out, but she realized just a little while ago that her tongue was still intact. Feng Wu had only injured it. Therefore, when the wound healed a little, Sapphiro could speak again. Feng Wu watched happily as the two of them struggled. But at that moment, she realized that the landslide had slowed down. Getting to her feet, she looked into the distance and saw a figure standing on top of the highest peak. When he opened his mouth, there was a flash of white light. The source of the landslide. The man devoured the landslide at its source. Feng Wu didn't know what to say. Her mouth fell open. She stood there, as if she had been struck by lightning. What a capable cultivator! That man was probably the most powerful cultivator she had ever seen. She believed that even Jun Linyuan couldn't have done that. The person, wrapped in a cassock, turned around, and his cold gaze landed on Feng Wu. Instantly, Feng Wu felt like she was suffocating. She forgot to breathe, and her heart stopped. She went so stiff that her body didn't feel like hers anymore. How capable was that man? Luckily, the man was only glancing around the way a deity scanned the mortal world. He soon looked away as if Feng Wu was no more than an ant. Whoosh! While Feng Wu's mind was somewhere else, a streak of energy aimed for her head. What? She shifted involuntarily, dodging the attack. When she turned around, there was a cold look in her eyes. It was Seven. He had climbed onto the cliff and was holding a sword in each hand. He was giving off a murderous energy. Feng Wu's eyes widened when she saw that almost half of Seven's wounds had healed, and his spiritual energy seemed to have grown denser. Seriously? Chapter 1749, Face Slapping, Round 11, 8. Feng Wu stared at Seven in disbelief and asked hesitantly, "Please don't tell me that you just had a breakthrough." Seven stared at Feng Wu with a grim look in his eyes, and he smirked. Feng Wu took a deep breath. She looked up at the sky. How unlucky could she be? When Six chased her earlier, she had been about to turn things around, when that man made a breakthrough. And the same thing happened to Seven. When she finally cornered Seven and wore him out, he also made a breakthrough. What was the matter with this world? Feng Wu die? Sapphiro gloated as she mumbled those words. What choice did Feng Wu have? She hadn't seen this coming. Before Seven could strike at her, Feng Wu sprang out and headed down the cliff. Luckily, the landslide was over. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to escape. Seven knew that Feng Wu was quick-witted, but he hadn't expected her to give up so easily. She ran without hesitation and gave him no time to react. Seeing Feng Wu run through the woods, Seven smirked. "Where do you think you're going?" Without another word, Seven ran after Feng Wu with his sword. After the breakthrough, not only had nearly half of Seven's wounds healed, he was more powerful than before. Soon he caught up with her. Looking behind her, Feng Wu cursed inwardly. A spiritual lord was simply too powerful. Seven had started off as a level 1 spiritual lord, and he was at level 2 now. There was no way that Feng Wu could defeat such a capable man. Seeing that 7 was getting closer, Feng Wu gritted her teeth and tried to think of a solution. There had to be a way. She was able to corner 7 before, so she should be able to do it again. She just had to think. Feng Wu racked her brain as she ran through the woods. Meanwhile, 7 stared at Feng Wu with great caution. He remembered clearly that when he first saw Feng Wu, she had still been a weak level 4 spiritual elder, but now, on the very same day, she was already a level 7 spiritual elder. In less than a day, she had made 3 breakthroughs. What did that mean? The members of the assassin organization were all talented cultivators recruited by the older prince, but of those people, no one had made 3 breakthroughs in a day. But that wasn't the most frightening thing about the girl. What went on in her head was a mystery. Only those who had been tricked by her would know how clever and resourceful she was. The thought of letting Feng Wu grow up made 7 shake his head. Given the chance, the girl would turn the senile grassland around. He determined that he had to kill her before it was too late. At that thought, 7 had a murderous look in his eyes, and he ran faster. Feng Wu used all the tricks she could think of. Bombs, traps, simple formations. She used everything. But this wasn't 7's first time chasing Feng Wu, and he knew what he was doing. Although he was still chasing her, he was getting closer. 1,000 meter, 500 meters, 300. Chapter 1750, Face Slapping, Round 12-1. 7 could already see Feng Wu clearly. He smiled coldly, this time that he was going to kill the girl. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. 7 picked up speed and his face twisted. 200 meters. 100 meters. Feng Wu looked over her shoulder and saw the frantic look in 7's eyes. Her stomach lurched. Shit. 7 was about to catch up with her. And she had almost run out of ideas. What should she do? Just then she saw a white shadow floating past her. What was that? She thought she was seeing things at first, but soon she saw another one. What was that? At first she had no idea. But when more and more appeared, Feng Wu knew what they were. These things were ghosts. They were of both genders and all age groups, but most of them were young. The only thing they had in common were their white robes and shoulder-length hair. They floated in the air like loose dandelions. It might sound like a lovely picture, but they were anything but lovely. One could almost call them hideous. Just then, a savage-looking ghost with sharp fangs charged at Feng Wu. There was a ferocious look in its eyes as it lunged at Feng Wu's neck. It wanted Feng Wu's blood. Whether it was because of the rare presence of humans here or due to Feng Wu's precious blood, all the ghosts started to fly toward her. Seriously? Feng Wu's eyes widened. A powerful spiritual lord was on her heels. 7 was a level 2 spiritual lord, and he was far more capable than she was. She would be dead if he caught up with her. Go away. Go away. Seeing that 7 were getting closer, and with so many ghosts coming at her, Feng Wu was filled with despair. She waved her hands and tried to get rid of the ghosts as if she was chasing away mosquitoes. Tihidat, the ghosts guffawed. It was a jarring, mocking sound. Mocking? Feng Wu couldn't believe that she was being mocked by ghosts. Whoosh! A female ghost was the first to land on Feng Wu. Right after that, thump, thump, thump. Countless ghosts surrounded Feng Wu. They stuck to Feng Wu like thin paper and wrapped around her. Teed at the crying voices of men, women, children, and elder people filled Feng Wu's ears. They were strange, mocking sounds. Anyone else would have collapsed if they were surrounded by so many ghosts. But Feng Wu wasn't just anyone. She was able to keep a clear head. However, even if she could keep a clear head, she had little hope left. Because the first ghost had wrapped its white body around Feng Wu's neck like a piece of white cloth. Chapter 1751, Face Slapping, Round 12-2. Cracked out, one could almost hear the sound of cracking bones. Feng Wu's face soon went from red to purple. 7 arrived at that moment. He frowned when he saw this, but he stopped and didn't take another step forward. After living in the senile grassland all these years, this wasn't the first time he had seen these ghosts. They were one of the special features of the land of the spirit source. They showed up when the spiritual essence recovered. They had no consciousness or intelligence, and they didn't pick sides. They would attack and bite anyone that came their way. If they had to be designated a side, they were the enemies of human beings by nature. Hence, they were the natural enemies of cultivators. The ghosts were very difficult to handle. 7 saw that there was only a streak of blood on the white cloth on the ghost's head. Level 1 ghosts weren't very powerful, but they came in great numbers. When there were enough ants, even an elephant could be killed. So, 7 involuntarily took a step back. Since Feng Wu was going to die soon, why should he take the risk? Just then, someone else caught up with 7. She panted as she frowned at him. 7, why did you stop? Don't you want to kill Feng Wu? It was none other than Sapphiro. 7 ignored her. He only crossed his arms and looked ahead with a frown. Sapphiro looked at him in bewilderment before she followed his gaze. When she saw what was going on, she covered her mouth in surprise with wide open eyes. Seriously? This has to be Feng Wu's most unlucky day. After the initial shock, she only wanted to laugh. The ghosts have gotten to her? Gosh, doesn't she know that you're supposed to drink cinnabar blood before you enter the land of the spirit source? She didn't, did she? Sapphiro gloated. 7 smirked. Those who set foot in the land of the spirit source for the first time have weaker energy, which is why they're the primary targets of the ghosts. Sapphiro nodded. Back when she set foot in the land of the spirit source for the first time, she had been attacked by the ghosts as well. But she had a lot of guards, which was why she had been able to get out without a scratch. Who would have known? Sapphiro heaved a sigh. Feng Wu is so cunning and full of tricks that she thinks she can fool everyone. She couldn't have known that this is how she was going to die. 7 was amazed as well. This Feng Wu had successfully tricked and escaped several spiritual lords. They almost thought that she had 9 lives like a cat, but death came so easily. Shaking his head, 7 was ready to leave. However, at that moment Feng Wu was being strangled. While her vision went blurry, her head was working perfectly fine. Am I going to die just like this? I won't accept this. Tears rolled down her cheeks and fell to the ground. She hadn't woken up her beautiful master yet. She hadn't defeated Zhuo Qingluan. She hadn't seen Jun Linyuan one more time. Chapter 1752, Face Slapping, Round 12-3. She hadn't traveled this continent yet. Nor had she tasted all the nice food she hadn't. And there were so many more things she had yet to do. Was she going to die, just like that? Had she really lost all hope? Just then, Feng Wu recalled a conversation she had before. It's not just any 10-direction seal. Once you smash it, you'll find a secret inside. What secret? You'll know after you smash it. Whoosh! There's indeed a secret hidden inside. This is no 10-direction seal. It's the Ghost King seal. Look, it says so here in the language of Xiaozhuan. What's the Ghost King seal? You don't know what that is? It's what the name suggests, a seal that belongs to the Ghost King. That was a conversation between Feng Wu and Little Phoenix, which now replayed inside her head. Feng Wu shuddered and regained consciousness. She then heard an anxious voice in her ears. The Ghost King seal. Use it now. It was Little Phoenix. Without thinking, Feng Wu used all her strength to pull the seal out of the ring space. Cut your finger. It has to be activated with your own blood. Little Phoenix reminded her. Feng Wu did as she was told. When the blood dripped onto the seal, the dim Ghost King seal suddenly lit up, as if it was alive. Meanwhile, Feng Wu's eyes glinted. The next moment Feng Wu's right hand turned, and she stamped the seal on a ghost on top of her. It was a male ghost. The moment the seal made contact with the ghost, it convulsed. It stared at Feng Wu, but it couldn't move. Feng Wu then peeled it off like a piece of paper. Whoosh! She then threw it away. The other ghosts didn't notice, and Feng Wu went on stamping them. Crack! Whoosh! A ghost was peeled off. Crack! Whoosh! Another ghost was peeled off. Crack! Whoosh! The ghosts had wrapped tightly around Feng Wu like layers of paper. But now those that hadn't gotten to her were all intimidated by her actions. They looked frightened and all fell back. The number of ghosts was limited, after all. With Feng Wu's stamping movement, fewer and fewer ghosts were left until she peeled off the last one. Few that she had been deprived of air for so long that her face had turned purple. Another minute and she might never have woken up again. Few. Feng Wu panted and glared at the ghosts around her. The look in her eyes frightened them, and they all fell back. They revered the Ghost King seal in her hand. At the same time, Seven was some distance away, when Sapphiro stopped him in an astonished voice. Feng Wu, she, arg. Seven frowned. This princess was so useless. Feng Wu was already dead. Why was she making such a big fuss again? Chapter 1753, Face Slapping, Round 12-4. Seven turned around while thinking this. He was about to tell Sapphiro off when he saw that Feng Wu was staring at him. Seven's stomach lurched. Seriously? Even a capable spiritual lord was astonished by Feng Wu. How was this possible? Seven frowned and stared at Feng Wu. You're alive? That was incredible. She had been surrounded by dozens of ghosts. If one's face was wrapped in layers upon layers of paper, they should suffocate. But Feng Wu was still alive. Feng Wu gave him a half-smile. Seven, are you surprised that I'm all right? Seven narrowed his eyes. He then stared at the seal in Feng Wu's hands and didn't say a word. That seal, Sapphiro pointed at the seal and cried out, isn't that my 10-direction seal? That's my 10-direction seal, right? Feng Wu only gave her a half-smile. Sapphiro almost lost her mind. In the land of the spirit source, the ghosts with the power of the spirit source were the most difficult creatures to handle. They came in great numbers and were everywhere. Therefore, they were able to surround a person and suffocate them. They were almost invincible. Hence, those who came to the land of the spirit source to cultivate and explore found these ghosts the most frightening. However, Feng Wu was able to handle them with the 10-direction seal. That 10-direction seal is mine. I'm its owner. Sapphiro was so excited that she looked like she was going to lose her mind. Since her tongue was almost healed, she could talk almost normally. Feng Wu, give me back my 10-direction seal. Give it back. Sapphiro trembled in excitement. While she didn't know why the 10-direction seal could control the ghosts, she realized that with the seal, one could move freely in the land of the spirit source. Remember, the mysterious seed of the spirit source could be found in this land. With the seed, one's capability would improve greatly. At that thought, Sapphiro was so excited that she almost lost control. But Feng Wu only gave her a mysterious smile, which reminded her of the morning sun. Give me that 10-direction seal. It's mine. It should be with its rightful owner. Sapphiro ran toward Feng Wu. After she offended Feng Wu, the younger prince went to apologize to Feng Wu. Sapphiro simply picked up the 10-direction seal at random and gave it to the prince. She had had no idea that the seal was a treasure, and it could control the ghosts. At that thought, Sapphiro was filled with regret. Feng Wu only grinned at Sapphiro with flickering eyes. She raised a leg when Sapphiro reached her. Thump! Sapphiro felt face down on the ground. Feng Wu! Sapphiro was almost driven mad by her rage. Feng Wu stepped on her back and smiled coldly. How dare you offend me? Sapphiro, you never learn, do you? Chapter 1754, Face Slapping, Round 12-5. Feng Wu, you're going to die. Sapphiro yelled at Feng Wu. Feng Wu smirked. Will you believe it if I say that you'll die first? Hearing that, Sapphiro felt a chill run down her spine, and her heart raced. Throwing a dirty look at Feng Wu, she turned to yell at Seven. Seven, what are you waiting for? Kill her. Seven was frustrated by Sapphiro's willfulness, but killing Feng Wu was his mission. So, when Sapphiro yelled at him, he stepped forward. Come up here and I'll stamp her to death. Feng Wu smiled coldly. Seven narrowed his eyes. Let go of the princess. Feng Wu smirked. If I die, you're going down with me. Seven smirked. Do you think you can move faster than I can? Feng Wu shook her head. Seven kept moving forward. Just then, Feng Wu rushed toward the onlooking ghosts and shouted, Help me stop him, and I won't stamp you. The ghosts looked at one another and didn't know how to react. Seven smirked. The ghosts only follow the rules of the land of the spirit source. How can they possibly fear you? That's just ridiculous. Feng Wu stared at the ghosts and smirked. Mark my words, if you don't help me now, I'll hunt you down and stamp every single one of you. The ghosts were about to retreat, but they paused when they heard this. Their friends who had been stamped looked like pieces of paper and couldn't float as freely as before. Set Chu free and I'll help you. Just then, a male ghost stopped next to a female ghost who had been stamped. He glared at Feng Wu. Feng Wu looked at the female ghost and recognized it. It was none other than the one that had charged at her earlier and almost tore a chunk of her flesh off. All right, if you help me, I'll release them from the seal. Feng Wu made the promise. I'll help you. The male ghost who wanted to save Chu was called you. It then charged at Seven. You has helped us so much. You is the one who's been leading us. Without you, there's no us. We should help you. The ghosts weren't emotionless. Having hung around one another all this time, they had grown attached and had feelings for their companions like humans did. When they saw Seven raise his leg at you, they took action at once. Whoosh! They all charged at Seven. Maybe a few ghosts weren't enough. But what about 10, 20, or 30? What about 100, 200, or 300? When layers upon layers of ghosts surrounded Seven, he looked astonished and panic-stricken. Ooh? Seven stared at Feng Wu. He had never expected that someone could actually command the ghosts. How's that possible? How's that possible? Seven couldn't understand it, because it didn't make sense. Because of the rule of the land of the spirit source, these ghosts had always been hostile toward cultivators. Chapter 1755, Girl in White 1. These ghosts were the enemy of all cultivators, because they hated all cultivators. Why would they follow Feng Wu's order? However, that was what happened. Feng Wu was ordering the ghosts around. It's the 10-direction seal. Sapphiro yelled at Seven. It's because of the seal. The owner of the seal can control the ghosts. Without it, Feng Wu is nothing. Take the seal from her. One had to admit that Sapphiro was absolutely right this time. Unfortunately, once Seven was surrounded by the ghosts, it was very difficult to break free. Thump, thump, thump. Infuriated, Seven struck out at the ghosts. However, the ghosts were only shadows. Although Seven was a capable warrior, he felt as if he was punching cotton. It was so frustrating. When he was finally about to make his way out, the ghosts turned into a white mist which wrapped around him and Sapphiro. It became very difficult to see things around them. Seven was speechless. Out of my way. Go away. No matter how much he coaxed or intimidated them, the ghosts still surrounded them as if they couldn't hear him. Seven was speechless. The 10-direction seal is mine. You should listen to me. I'm your master. Sapphiro yelled. However, the ghosts seemed to have turned deaf. In fact, they could hear. They just pretended that they didn't hear her. Seven gritted his teeth. If things went on like this, Feng Wu was definitely going to run. Someone as clever she was would definitely make use of the opportunity. The Wall of Death. Seven activated his most powerful stance. Immediately, all the ghosts were imprisoned by the wall. Ah! They were crushed and devoured until they became streaks of smoke and disappeared. 7 snorted. You level 1 ghosts think too highly of yourselves. However, once he finished handling the ghosts, he couldn't find Feng Wu anywhere. She headed west. Sapphiro shouted at 7. 7 turned west, running as fast as he could. Run, run, run. Feng Wu ran like a shooting star. But she knew that if she went on running like this, she would be caught eventually. She had to think of something. More and more ghosts began to show up. Some rose up from the ground and some appeared out of nowhere. But one thing was for sure. When they saw the Ghost King's seal in her hand, they all avoided her. Feng Wu didn't know what to say. She grabbed a ghost before it could run away. Why are you all in a hurry? Feng Wu was confused by the great number of ghosts. Intimidated by the seal, the ghost tried to shake Feng Wu off, but her grip was very tight and it couldn't run away. It rolled its eyes at Feng Wu. A very, very powerful Ghost King is going to show up in that cave up ahead. We all need to go there now. Chapter 1756, Girl in White, 2. After that, the ghost moved as fast as it could manage. Feng Wu's eyes lit up. A great Ghost King was about to come out? Did that mean that Feng Wu could use her Ghost King seal? At that thought, she immediately followed the other ghosts and quickly headed for the cave. Because of the seal, she had ghost energy around her. Therefore, the ghosts saw her as one of them. Meanwhile, 7 saw Feng Wu from afar and smirked. Where do you think you're going? He followed her without hesitation. While Feng Wu had her Ghost King seal, 7 had his death wall. Therefore, the two of them were able to walk among the ghosts without causing a reaction. Whoosh! 7 picked up speed. He walked through one ghost after another and was getting closer and closer. Turning around, Feng Wu saw that 7 was almost within arm's reach, and her pupils contracted. At the same time, thousands of kilometers away at the center of the land of the spirit source, wrapped in a red cassock, the master teacher suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes were so cold that they seemed awash with ice and snow. They could freeze one's blood. He was invincible. He was probably the most powerful cultivator on the Sinal grassland right now. Right now, he seemed to sense the slight disturbance in the cave thousands of kilometers away. The Ghost King seal is out. The man in the cassock had a brooding look in his eyes. He was none other than the master teacher of the Sinal grassland. Both Sapphiro and her genius senior brother wanted to become master teacher Si Basie's disciple. Staring at the Ghost King seal in Feng Wu's hand, he murmured to himself. That seal shouldn't show up here, but Si Basie saw what was going on in the cave. A pretty girl wearing a fiery red dress moved swiftly, as if she was dancing. She looked very clever. Huh? Si Basie looked surprised. The girl was only a level 7 spiritual elder, but the man hunting her was a level 2 spiritual lord. That was a difference of 5 levels. Such a difference should have made it impossible for her to do anything, but Si Basie was going to look away after a quick glance. After all, as the supervisor of the land of the spirit source, he had to survey the entire land. But to his surprise, there seemed to be something magical about the girl. He just couldn't look away. It wasn't because of her looks, since to the master teacher, a pretty face was no different from a skull. He couldn't look away because of the mysterious air around that girl. He studied her. She was able to dodge a fatal strike from a spiritual lord. And she did it again. Si Basie couldn't believe his eyes. With a wave of his hand, the image he saw was enlarged and became clearer. In the image that looked like an unfolding scroll, the girl was able to set up a simple formation, which she used to dodge the third strike. Since Si Basie was in charge of watching over the entire land of the spirit source, his mental powers should cover the entire land rather than be focused on a single spot. However, Chapter 1757, Girl in White 3. What was happening was so unbelievable that even Si Basie, who hadn't been moved by anything for many years, felt uneasy. Inside the cave, Feng Wu had no idea that her every move was being watched by Master Teacher Si Baisi, the most powerful cultivator on the Sino grassland and the supervisor of the land of the spirit source. Right now, Feng Wu was all about dealing with Seven. After the first 3 strikes, Feng Wu was flagging, but Seven was still full of energy. Feng Wu, you're not going anywhere this time. Seven pressed forward. Feng Wu kept falling back. But there was limited space in the cave, and soon, Feng Wu had her back pressed against the wall and had nowhere to go. As for the rest of the ghosts, Feng Wu smiled bitterly. She had the Ghost King's seal, but Seven had the Death Wall. Therefore, the ghosts decided not to take sides and had all left the cave. All that was left in the cave were Feng Wu, Seven, and a tightly sealed coffin. 3 steps, 2 steps, 1 step. Seven walked up to Feng Wu and rested the blade of his sword on Feng Wu's shoulder. Feng Wu could sense the cold sensation coming off the blade. The sword was so sharp that a hair was cut in half as soon as it landed on the blade. If the sword struck down, Feng Wu would have no chance of survival. Seven stared at Feng Wu with cold, murderous eyes. At the center of the land of the spirit source, the mysterious master teacher in a cassock shook his head. What a pity! He had expected some sort of turnaround, but it seemed that true genius was still very hard to come by. When Si Baisi shook his head and was about to look away, Seven struck at Feng Wu with his sword. All of a sudden, Feng Wu stomped her foot. Thump! There was a series of explosive sounds beneath them, and they seemed to go on forever. Seven stared at Feng Wu with a twisted face. He then smirked. An explosion? Are you still not done with this petty trick? Do you think that's all it is, an explosion? Feng Wu stared at Seven and gave him a half-smile. The smile gave Seven the creeps, and he stared at Feng Wu. Feng Wu smiled and looked unperturbed. Seven's pupils contracted. Whatever trick you're playing, it's futile once you're dead. After that, Seven struck at Feng Wu again. However, a cold hand grabbed Seven's sword from behind. Seven felt a cold sensation rising up from the bottom of his feet. He slowly turned around and saw something he would never forget. A girl dressed in white stood there quietly. Her head had been down, but now she looked up and smiled at him with blood coming out of her eyes. That smile, it was so terrifying. Even someone like Seven was frightened and startled. The next second, the girl in white suddenly reached out and tried to choke Seven. Seven tried to parry with his sword, but the girl stuck out her tongue, took the blade between her teeth, and there was a crack. The blade shattered. Everything went very quiet after that. What a powerful ghost. Seeing this, even Feng Wu took a few steps back. Chapter 1758, Girl in White 4. The Ghost King was indeed very capable. That move alone was enough to intimidate Seven. Seeing that things were going south, Seven immediately activated the death wall. But to his surprise, when the girl saw the wall, she only smirked. With a wave of her fair hand, there was a hole in the death wall, as if it was made of paper. She did it so effortlessly. Seven stared at her in disbelief and was astonished. Feng Wu's eyes widened as well. She had no idea that the girl in white could be so terrifying. Meanwhile, Si Baisi's eyes lit up when he noticed this. Interesting. The White Fairy, one of the 3 kings of the land of the spirit source, was helping that girl. As far as he knew, the White Fairy was very hard to please, and she was much older than she appeared to be. Si Baisi didn't look at the White Fairy. Instead, he kept his gaze on Feng Wu. He wondered what the girl had done to deserve the fairy's favor. He wanted to look away, but he couldn't. Meanwhile, in the cave, Seven and the White Fairy were exchanging blows. Thump, thump, thump. Both were exceptionally capable. Strictly speaking, Seven was the inferior one, but because the White Fairy had only just woken up from the coffin, she hadn't recovered her full power yet. Thump, thump, thump. Seven flew backwards after he took several hits and smashed into the wall. Feng Wu's eyes lit up. She knew that Seven was bound to lose this time, so she was studying the girl in white rather than the captain. The girl stepped on Seven's chest and smirked. "Give it to me." "What are you talking about?" Seven spat out a mouthful of blood and stared at the girl. The white fairy had an eerie look in her eyes. Suddenly she stuck out her tongue. Her red tongue immediately wrapped around Seven's neck, almost choking him. "If you won't give it up, I'll take it myself." Her serrated tongue suddenly moved, and there was a tearing sound. Seven's chest was ripped open. Blood gushed out, painting the entire wall red. Feng Wu stepped back and narrowed her eyes. This girl. After Seven's chest was torn open, a streak of black smoke slowly rose out of his body. The black smoke then took shape, turning into a human form before it landed on the ground. "Master." The figure then stood in front of the white fairy and bowed at her. Seven stared at the girl. "Blue." The fairy snorted. "How dare you steal my new and confine him?" Seven was filled with despair. He had no idea that things would turn out like this. Indeed, had it not been for the land of the spirit source, he wouldn't have made such rapid progress. Last time, when the land of the spirit source appeared, he happened to catch an old ghost. Chapter 1759, Girl in White, 5. To refine that ghost, he had to go through hell, and he almost hadn't made it. With much difficulty, he had been able to wake up again. "If he's your servant, who are you?" Seven put a hand over his chest where blood was gushing out that he stared at her and had a bad feeling. The white fairy snorted. "I'm the white butterfly." The white butterfly. Hearing that name, Seven felt as if a thunderclap had just exploded over his head. "You're the white butterfly, one of the 3 kings of the land of the spirit source?" Seven spat out mouthfuls of blood as he coughed. "I didn't expect that people would still remember my name after my long slumber." "I like you," the white butterfly told Seven. Seven knew that if he didn't say something, he would die. "I know Master Teacher C. Basie. I'm his indirect pupil." Seven cried out. The white fairy stared at Seven. "It's true. I really am. I'm telling the truth. Since you know my name, I won't kill you. You can go." The white fairy ignored Seven after that. Feng Wu's eyes widened. "Master Teacher C. Basie?" The white fairy spared his life just because he knew that man. Was that master teacher really so terrifying? Meanwhile, the white fairy turned her gaze on Feng Wu. "You," the white fairy casually crooked a finger at her. "Come here." Feng Wu's stomach lurched. At the same time, a few thousand kilometers away, Master Teacher C. Basie also looked surprised. Even C. Basie himself didn't realize that his mood had changed drastically in the past few minutes, although he had always been able to remain unperturbed. Being a clever girl, Feng Wu immediately ran to the white fairy. The white fairy stared at Feng Wu with her cold, brooding eyes. "Your name?" "Feng Wu." Feng Wu grinned. The white fairy narrowed her eyes. "Feng Wu? Why do I feel that I've heard that name before?" Tilting her head, the white fairy tried to recall, but her head was simply too muddled. Feng Wu was on edge. This white fairy was so terrifying. Seven was a spiritual lord, but she handled him as if he was a monkey. Feng Wu knew that she couldn't afford to offend this fairy. "Give it to me." She stretched out an open palm to Feng Wu. Feng Wu bit her lower lip and hesitated. Should she give in or stick to her principles? The white fairy stared at Feng Wu with a threatening look in her eyes. Feng Wu asked, "Do I have to?" The white fairy stared at Fairy and smirked. Before she could say anything, the ghost known as Nu snorted. "How dare you? Do you know the consequence of disobeying the fairy?" Feng Wu asked, "What would that be?" Before Nu could answer, the white fairy silenced him with a wave of her hand. "So, are you going to go back on your word? You made a promise." The white fairy stared at Feng Wu with a half-smile on her face. Feng Wu stared at her. "Our deal was that you would kill a person for me after I woke you up. But now that you're awake, not only didn't you help me with the killing, you're also forcing me to give you the seal. I won't stand for it. There was a murderous look in the white fairy's eyes when she stared at Feng Wu. How dare you defy me? Meanwhile, on a mountain peak less than 50 kilometers away, a teenager in black sat on the very top. With his legs crossed, he looked as tall and straight as a bamboo. He sat there facing the sun and with his eyes closed. His fair hands were on his knees with the thumbs and middle fingers pressed together. Spiritual essence danced on his skin like tiny fairies. When he breathed in, the plants around him were covered in frost. When he breathed out, the plants immediately withered. Everything about this teenager suggested that he was unmatched. If Feng Wu were there, she would have blurted out his name. Jun Linyuan. Chapter 1760, Chu Fengxiao, the third senior brother, 1. The white fairy stared at Feng Wu and smiled coldly. Are you reasoning with me? Feng Wu said, so, are you saying that you're not reasonable? The white fairy gave Feng Wu a sympathetic look and shook her head. With my advantage over you, I don't need to be reasonable. Don't you get it? Of course Feng Wu knew that. I thought you were different. Feng Wu frowned. The white fairy gave Feng Wu a half-smile. Why would you think that? Feng Wu blinked innocently. Because you're pretty. How can someone as good-looking as you be unreasonable? At first, the atmosphere had been so tense that a battle could start at any moment. Sapphiro clenched her fists in excitement outside the cave, and Seven was equally excited. But Seven wasn't what he used to be. Having lost his death wall, he was now greatly emaciated. Next to the white fairy, Nu stared at Feng Wu as if she was already dead. After all, the white fairy could kill Feng Wu as easily as snapping her fingers. At the same time, the white fairy kept her unblinking gaze on Feng Wu. Other people would have been scared to death by her gaze, but Feng Wu was still smiling. Are you saying that I'm pretty? The white fairy murmured. Feng Wu smiled. That's right. You're very pretty, especially your eyes. They're like snow lotus on an iceberg and bright stars in the night sky. They almost take my breath away. Feng Wu actually hadn't come up with these words herself. They were fed to her by Little Phoenix. Are you sure I can say that? Feng Wu asked Little Phoenix in her head. She had no idea why Little Phoenix told her to say those things, but the bird told her decisively that if she said them, she would be all right. Little Phoenix told her to keep an eye on the fairy's facial expression, and the bird was right. The white fairy was indeed deep in thought, and she seemed to be cherishing some pleasant old memory. Who and what was on her mind? Feng Wu knew that she needed to be very careful with what she said after that. One slip of her tongue and she might be killed. Judging by the battle between the white fairy and Seven early, Feng Wu could tell that the white fairy was unfathomably capable. While the white fairy was lost in thought, Feng Wu took a step back, then another. If it was possible, she would like to run away from this cave. Seeing this, Nu reminded the white fairy, Master? Master? That immediately woke the white fairy up from her pleasant memory. Seeing the frown on her face, Feng Wu was alarmed. No, the fairy was going to lose her temper. As expected, the next second, the white fairy stared at Feng Wu with a murderous look in her eyes. Immediately, Feng Wu's heartbeat quickened, as if her heart was going to jump out of her throat. However, the next second, the white fairy turned her cold gaze on Nu. Smack! The white fairy smacked Nu on the head. Crack. Nu smashed into the wall and almost passed out. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.